Hello everyone, today, I'll go over what if Deku can see the true darkness part 2. And all the credit goes to the author in the description below. Let us begin. Chapter 9. Bloodied Nose. Izuku made good time to Akari Higashi's apartment building, keeping a quick pace as he walked the 2 blocks to the dead woman's home. He stopped in front of the old and gray apartment block and quickly looked around, paranoid about anyone watching him and wondering what he could be doing here. But finding no one paying him any mind, he climbed the stoop and went inside. In the dirty lobby with cracked tiles and flickering lights, Izuku found a number of mailboxes on the wall opposite of a small unoccupied room with an open door, probably belonging to the superintendent. Eyeing the rest of the lobby and checking around corners, Izuku found no one and noticed a complete lack of security cameras before moving over to the mass of mailboxes, hoping to find one for Akari. Unfortunately, the mailboxes were only numbered by apartment number and not labeled by resident. Cursing this, Izuku began to try and figure out which apartment was hers by pulling the missing persons list up again on his phone to try and see if he had missed her apartment number. Sighing in frustration at not finding an answer, Izuku put his phone away and glared at the numbers before him. There was 24 apartments in the building across 4 floors, and it wouldn't take him too long to go to the between and phase his head through the door to take a peek inside to see if it looked like Akari's apartment, would it? With roughly 10 minutes to get his head in and out for each door, if her apartment was the last one he checked, it would only take at most 4 hours. Assuming he could tell it was hers with just a quick glance and that no lizards came looking for him. To say nothing of the fact that he would technically be trespassing, although now that he thought about it, he already did that at the subway tunnel. Not very heroic to commit crimes while trying to solve one. Izuku muttered to himself as he turned away from mailboxes and eyed the hallway leading away from the lobby to the first-floor apartments. His eyes drifted over the open door of the presumed superintendent's room before they snapped back to it. But, then again, I'm not a licensed hero yet. Making sure that no one was around for about the 3rd time, Izuku dashed across the lobby into the superintendent's room and flicked the lights on. Finding a messy desk, computer, a couple file cabinets, and a dartboard on the wall, he quickly began to rummage around looking for any sign of Akari's apartment number. He quickly found it while skimming one of the file cabinets, room 203, and noticed that Akari apparently had a roommate, named Mio Okada. Satisfied with his find, Izuku quickly put everything back where he found it and turned the lights off as he walked out of the room into the still empty lobby. Finding the stairs, he walked up to the 2nd floor and found apartment 203. Taking a calming breath, he knocked on the door and waited to see if Akari's roommate was home before he tried phasing through the door. It was only polite after all, and he'd like to avoid investing around 8 to 10 minutes passing through the door to get in and another 8 to 10 minutes to get out. Especially if lizards found him while he was searching the apartment and attacked him. The door to 203 opened and a young woman dressed in pajamas around Izuku's height, short blue hair, and pink eyes. She had bags under her eyes and looked at him tiredly with a small scowl. "The hell you want, kid?" the woman asked sourly, and Izuku gulped. "M. Mio Okada?" Izuku asked in return and got a nod in confirmation back. "I'm here to ask some questions about Akari Higashi." "What?" she asked, shocked. "Kid, I don't know what kind of joke you're pulling, but if you know anything you should be going to the cops." She looked him up and down critically and he began to sweat. "Or are you some kind of junior detective they sent to ask follow-up questions?" she asked sarcastically. No, I'm just a concerned citizen," Izuku explained, trying to think of a proper term that wouldn't reveal too much. "I just think that I can help with finding her." He lied since he knew exactly where she was currently rotting away. "Then why come to me and not the police?" Mio asked, suspicious. "I believe that the police would be less willing to help me," Izuku explained after a moment, "and that they may not be able to approach this case like I can." "What, you got some kind of special quirk or something?" Mio asked with a raised eyebrow. "In a sense," Izuku evaded. "You know that using your quirk like that without a hero license makes you a villain, right?" she asked like he was an idiot. "Technically, it makes me a vigilante since I'm using it to do hero work," Izuku clarified, gulping at the mention of heroes and hero work. "Let's say I believe you." Mio says hypothetically. And that I suspect someone who probably has something to do with Akari's disappearance that the police just ignored for some reason. She sneered at the mention of this hypothetical person. That, as far as I can tell, was not even questioned before the police just gave up on finding Akari. She revealed, and Izuku wondered why she would think that the police would give up after only a week and a half. Although considering that he was chasing after a sorcerer or a apparently human-looking monster, there might be magic or other strange stuff going on. If I help you, how far are you willing to go to find Akari and bring him to justice, Mr. Concerned Citizen? She asked seriously. As far as I need to, Izuku answered cautiously, his revolver in his coat pocket suddenly feeling heavier. Mio hummed before turning around and walking into her apartment and gestured for him to follow her. Come on in, Mr. Concerned Citizen, I ain't got all day. Guro. No luck, Murata. Local pimp and scumbag. Specifically Akari's pimp. Nicknamed No Luck because he was unlucky in about everything, starting at birth when he had been born quirkless and continuing until a year and a half ago. Then he somehow managed to find a job that didn't need a lot of work but paid very, very well. A job that he would often brag about but never go into the details. A job that also came with enough connections to get him into the local criminal scene and eventually pimping. But Guro was a man of habit, or not learning his lessons as Mio had put it, and spent his weekends gambling at his preferred underground casino when not having to deal with his girls or their Johns. Izuku fidgeted nervously as he looked down the dark alleyway that Mio had given him the address to. He looked around, wondering if he shouldn't enter the between to avoid being seen even anywhere near his destination. With cautious steps he walked down the alleyway and stopped at a nondescript metal door and knocked twice. A hidden panel in the door opened and a pair of eyes glared down at him. Hi. I was wondering if Izuku started to speak only for the panel to snap closed. Get lost, kid. A muffled voice from behind the door told him. All right then. Izuku whispered to himself. Kefcock xexxex hug JT. He muttered and entered the between, the dark alleyway now becoming perfectly illuminated. Okay, here we go, he said as he looked around to make sure that there were no lizards. He stepped up to the door and, praying that the doorman was waiting off to the side and not directly in front of the door, he began to pass through it. Trying to move as fast as he could, Izuku managed to pass completely through the door in just over 8 minutes. Wow, shaved 2 minutes off the last time I had to do that, Izuku said happily as he walked away from the door and the doorman leaning near it. He walked down a hallway that ended with a coat check and large double door that was thankfully ajar. Walking through the open doors, Izuku found himself in a large open room split into an upper and lower area, with a pair of stairs on opposite sides connecting them and a railing to stop anyone from falling down into the lower area. The upper area was primarily a well-stocked bar with a few booths for private conversations, and the lower area was filled with tables for roulette, craps, and poker. All in all, there was about 18 people in the room that Izuku could see. 3 at the bar, including the bartender, 2 at a booth talking about something, and the rest down in the lower area gambling or dealing at the tables. He spotted a bald head at one of the poker tables and walked over to the nearest stairs to go down, his hand drifting to his coat pocket with his revolver. The fuck are these cards, man? The bald man complained to the dealer as Izuku came up to him to inspect him. Well, he certainly looked to be in his mid-30s and had no hair and brown eyes like Mio described Guro having. Quit your bitchin', Guro, one of the other players said, confirming the bald man's identity for Izuku. If you're gonna complain, you might as well just hand your money over to me right away and save us all the trouble. Fuck you, Guro commented as he picked up a couple chips and threw them into the pot. Call. Izuku was then treated to several rounds of poker as he stood there trying to figure out how the hell he was going to get Guro alone to talk him, what he was going to say, and just what he was going to do if he was Akari's murderer and was responsible for all the other bodies. Could he just shadow the man until he was alone? But what if he had to leave? What if he got in a car or packed train? No way Izuku could phase through a car door enough to get inside before he started driving off somewhere. Could he really spend all day following this guy around until he got his chance? How could he work a conversation around to Akari? How was he going to hide that he suspected Guro of killing her? Should he drop the pretense altogether and just accuse him of killing her right off the bat? Hell, should he just jump straight to asking questions about how got to the between? Hope that he'd have an involuntary reaction that'd justify Izuku. What the hell was he going to do with this guy? If he was Akari's killer and the man dumping all of the bodies in the subway tunnel in the between, then Izuku would have to kill him. The entertainer and robber had been very clear about what was expected of him. He had to kill any uncontained magic users, containment of course being a part of and under the very loose supervision of his little group. If he failed to kill him, then if anyone else found out about it, then they'd just force him to kill him anyway. And then kill him after he was done for fucking up. It'll be fine. Izuku tried to reassure himself as his trembling hand went into his coat pocket and closed around his revolver. If he killed Akari, then that makes him a murderer, so it's fine to kill him. He wasn't actually sure what you had to do to earn the death penalty these days. And if he is responsible for the other bodies, then he either works for whoever killed them or he killed them himself. That definitely earns him a bullet. Izuku continued to talk to himself to try and psyche himself up for possibly his first human kill. Man, fuck this. Guro snarled as he threw his cards down on the table and pushed his stool away. Maybe my good luck will return after I piss all the bad away, he said as he began to walk away, Izuku following after him. Okay, this is it. Izuku breathed deeply as he followed Guro up the stairs and to a door next to the bar. He practically shadowed the bald man to make it through the door before it closed and they entered a small bathroom. There was only 2 stalls, a sink, and a cracked mirror above the sink. It also stank to high heavens of piss and shit to the point that Izuku nearly gagged. "Aw man, what the fuck?" Guro exclaimed as he looked into the first stall and saw the mess that had been left behind. He moved to the second stall and finding it more to his liking stepped up to the toilet and started to unzip his pants, not bothering to close the stall. "All right, here we go," Izuku whispered as he pulled his revolver out and pointed it at Goro's back. "UFG CASWLOFGH. He spoke and returned to the real world. Goro's back straightened and his arms tensed up. He had felt Izuku come out of the between. Just like Izuku had felt the between man coming out of it before it attacked him. "Freeze!" Izuku commanded as he jabbed his revolver into Goro's back directly over his spine. "Don't move. Put your hands up." "Those are contradictory orders, asshole," Guro commented icily while standing still. "So which would you like more?" "Hands up," Izuku ordered and tensed as Guro slowly raised his hands above his head in the cramped conditions of the bathroom stall. "Now, I'm going to ask you some questions and you're to answer them or what?" Guro asked and Izuku could hear the sneer in his voice. "You gonna shoot me in the back? You even know how to use that gun, kid? Is the safety even off?" he asked mockingly and Izuku pulled the hammer back and let the click fill the small bathroom. "Is now," Izuku said. "Kid, you have no idea how much shit you're getting in," Guro stated calmly. "But tell you what. You get that gun off my back and I let you go on your merry way and we both forget this ever happened." "Did you kill Akari Higashi?" Izuku demanded to know suddenly, desperate to regain control of the situation with Guro not being even remotely fazed by the threat of Izuku's gun. "Did you kill her and dump her body in a subway tunnel? I was wondering what that feeling was right before you showed up." Guro mused to himself. "So, you got magic too, huh?" "Boss said that there'd probably be others. Never expected a kid though. They teach you that in school these days?" "Shut up," Izuku shouted. "Did you kill Akari or not?" "Yeah, I did. Bitch slapped me in front of a potential business partner. Made me look weak. It cost me a lot of fucking money." Guro admitted bitterly. "The fuck is it to you though? You some kind of defender of the city's whores? 'Cause let me tell you, there are easier ways to get them to show you a good time. Paying them for starters." "And the other bodies? You kill them too?" Izuku asked, his anger rising at the confirmation that Guro was in fact a murderer. "Oh no, I just picked them up and dropped them off." Guro waved away, which nearly caused Izuku to fire his revolver into his back. "But if you think I'm selling out my boss, then you got another thing coming." Figures murderers would look out for each other. Izuku hissed. But do you feel nothing at what they've done? They've tortured and killed dozens of people. Hey, fuck you. Guro replied angrily. You have any idea what my life was like before I met him? I was fucking nobody, didn't even have a fucking quirk so I could be a villain. But he saw something in me, he said. Guro, you come in here all the time and I swear you're the only person I can deal with that doesn't give me a fucking migraine. He trusted me to keep my mouth shut and gave me the gift, that little magic spell we both share. Guro continued with a grin in his voice. And he's gonna give me more so I can really begin moving on up. Your boss chose you because you didn't give him a headache? Izuku asked quietly, remembering what the robber had said about intelligent monsters, aliens, and non-humans' reactions to quirks. Yeah, I was the only one who didn't drive him up the wall by being an idiot or a sucker, Guro stated proudly. And what does your boss look like exactly? Izuku asked in a cold sweat. What is his quirk? Before Guro could answer, the door to the bathroom swung open and a man began to walk in before he saw Izuku and Guro. What the fuck? The man said, perplexed at the teenage boy with a gun to Goro's back, and Izuku turned his head to look at him in a panic. It was all Guro needed. He turned quickly and slammed his hands around Izuku's revolver, wrenching it to the side and away from his body. Izuku cried out and tried to pull away from the murderous pimp, only for Guro to rear his head back and headbutt him in the nose. There was a crunch and blood began to flow out of Izuku's nostrils. Gah! Izuku cried out and in his pain dropped his revolver onto the dirty bathroom floor. Thankfully, modern revolvers had a safety feature to stop them from firing unless the trigger is pulled, so it didn't fire when it hit ground. Let's take this somewhere private. Guro hissed quietly in Izuku's ear. Kekwak xexxex hooped. And with that they both disappeared from the bathroom and the man's sight and entered the between. Izuku was only 14 years old and had barely done any kind of physical activity before his life had went to hell, so there was no way he could overpower the man in his mid-30s. So Izuku was dragged out of the bathroom, the man who interrupted their talk holding it open and staring dumbly at what he had just seen, and thrown to an open space in the upper area. Gotta admit, Guro said as he cracked his knuckles and glared at Izuku, who clutched his broken and bleeding nose, ain't never beaten a kid to death before. But you put a gun to a man's back, I guess age just stops mattering. Oh fuck. Oh fuck. Izuku thought in a panic as he frantically looked for any way to escape. Someone had closed the double doors to the gambling den, so he couldn't pass through them quickly enough to stop Guro from catching him. YGHA and Kadiev. He tried to speak the return words only for them to come out mangled and smothered. Ah. What's that? Trying to leave? Guro mocked with a laugh. Not with that broken sniffer, you're not. He slowly began to walk towards Izuku, who began to tremble in fear. Think, damn it. Think. He's not any worse than that thing from the between that attacked me. Izuku tried to come up with a plan on how he was going to deal with this. He wasn't given a lot of time before Guro lunged forward with a fist raised and Izuku barely managed to jump out of the way. Okay. I'm smaller and faster than him. That's good, Izuku thought as he narrowly dodged another swing. What Izuku didn't realize was that despite avoiding Goro's swings, he was being maneuvered closer and closer to the railing that separated the upper and lower areas. Soon enough Izuku's lower back hit the railing and he was only left with his right and left to jump to. Guro decided to change things up and delivered a hard kick with his right leg. Izuku, paralyzed with indecision on which way to dodge, was struck square in the chest and he went tumbling over the railing. He fell a good 8 feet and landed on his back, knocking the breath out of him. What's wrong? Guro asked as he looked down at Izuku, who was struggling to his feet. You ain't got no fire unless you got a gun to a man's back. He then stepped forward and passed through the railing, falling down and landing in front of Izuku. That's a real chicken shit way to play. I got to think of something. What do I have to fight him with? He thought over what he had brought. He had his 2 cell phones, maybe he could chuck them at Guro or try to club his head in with them. The only other thing that he had was the 12 extra bullets that he had Braug. With a plan quickly forming in his mind, Izuku turned from Guro and bolted around the various gambling tables and the people playing them. Where the fuck you think you're going? Guro shouted as he chased after Izuku, just phasing through the tables and gamblers. Just like Izuku hoped he would. Putting his hand into his pocket, Izuku grabbed a fistful of bullets and, while running past one of the tables that Goro was on the path to cross through, tossed them under a roulette table and stood behind it. With just his back to the wall, Izuku once again had nowhere left to run except to his left and right. "Alright, this was fun at first, but I ain't gonna spend all day chasing you around," Goro growled as he stalked forward. As he began to phase through the roulette table, his feet landed on bullets who, due to being brought into the between, could not be phased through like a real-world object, rolled around under his shoe. This caused him to stumble forward and begin to fall. Izuku had planned for Goro to stumble forward and while on the ground quickly stomp on his head and then run to go get his gun while Goro was dazed. Then with his weapon in hand he would have the upper hand and continue his interrogation. However, what Izuku had not expected was for Goro to lose his focus and stop being intangible as he fell forward, lodging himself inside the roulette table. The roulette table that was currently in use, with a spinning wheel currently lodged in Goro's gut. That split second of lost concentration was all it took for Goro's stomach to be torn apart by the spinning wheel, his intestines falling out and twirling around with it. Goro tried to scream in pain and terror only for blood to spray out of his mouth, striking Izuku's shirt with flecks of red as he stood horrified at what he had caused. His blood quickly flooded the roulette table, hiding the numbers and chips in a wave of crimson. He tried to steady himself with his free arms only for them to be knocked away as the dealer moved some chips onto a black number, smearing the blood he couldn't see away. Izuku watched as Goro stared right at him, terror and fear in his eyes as he tried to speak with only blood coming out. But Goro's eyes quickly went dull and he slumped forward, lying dead half in the roulette table and on a pool of his own blood. Izuku took deep shaking breaths as he merely looked on in horror at the carnage that he had unwittingly caused. I did hint, want this. He screamed to no one through his broken nose. He slid his back down the wall and collapsed to the ground, muttering the words over and over again. He spent some time like that, collapsed on the ground and unseen by everyone in the room, especially by the people playing roulette who were slowly but surely tearing Goro's body to pieces until he was nothing more than a red smear on the table, their hands, and their clothes. Eventually some lizards wandered in and began to lap up the blood in smaller pieces, ignoring Izuku in place of the easier meal. He watched them, numb to any kind of feeling, but got up when they ducked under the table, began picking at his legs dangling out of the bottom of the table. "Get out of here. Go on," he said dully, and the lizards hissed at him, and for a moment he thought they were going to attack him. But instead they just went back up to the top of the roulette table, doing their best to grab pieces of flesh while dodging the betting of the men at the table. He was my only lead, Izuku thought dully as he ducked under the table to pick up his bullets, a couple having been stepped on and crushed by the gamblers and dealer. Counting them, he found that he was down by 3, leaving him with 9 rounds in his pockets and the 6 still in his revolver. What am I going to do now? He thought as he sat on the ground. Guess I'll go through his pockets, Izuku thought as he maneuvered himself under the table and was treated to the lovely smell of Goro's bowels that had voided on his death. Fighting his disgust, Izuku went through his pockets and pulled out his car keys, wallet, and a crumbled bunch of receipts. Izuku tossed the keys and wallet. He wasn't about to rob a corpse, let alone a man he had inadvertently killed. He uncrumpled the bunch of receipts and found 4 of them, 2 for some bar and 2 from a restaurant. He took them with him as he walked away from the carnage and back to the upper area, sitting at the bar while the man who had walked in on him and Goro argued with the bartender about his revolver which laid between them. He laid the receipts out in front of him. They were faded with age and probable washing, which means that Goro didn't clean out his pockets before putting them in the wash. The first was from Lady So's Burmese cuisine, dated about 3.5 weeks ago for a single takeout order of Bak Bon Jo. The second was from Kin's Bar, also dated 3.5 weeks ago but about an hour later with a number of drinks ordered. The third was again from Lady So's, this time only a week and a half ago and again with only a single order of Bak Bon Jo. The fourth was Kin's again, A week and a half ago, but about an hour later after the lady So's receipt and a number of drinks. Something gave Izuku a really bad feeling as he looked at these receipts. Sighing, he got off the bar stool and walked over to where the bartender and the interrupting man were arguing over his revolver and his and Goro's disappearance. Izuku then spent the next few minutes trying his damnedest to say, UFG CASWLOFGH, through a broken nose. And once he was satisfied with that, practicing Kefkok XEXXEX hug JT, ready to grab his gun once he said it correctly. So the bartender and interrupting man were treated to the sight of a bloody and broken-nosed Izuku appearing out of thin air, grabbing his revolver from between them, turning around, and then disappearing as quickly as he appeared. They were so stunned that they didn't say anything until Izuku reappeared to open the double doors that led out of the large room and into the entrance hallway. The doorman tried to stop him and demanded to know how he got inside, but Izuku merely went back into the between, walking past the confused doorman, and once reaching the entrance left it to open the door. He was in no mood to try phasing through like he did the first time, especially with some blue iguanas in the next room. By the time the doorman made it back to the entrance, Izuku was back in the dark alleyway and on his way to find somewhere to sit down. That somewhere was a nearby cafe with the beginnings of the lunch crowd drifting in. He sat down and quickly searched for the addresses on the receipts, ignoring the looks his bloody and broken nose were getting him. Once he entered both addresses into his directions app and looked at the quickest route between them, his blood went cold and he quickly thought back to the address of the subway tunnel that Goro had been dumping the bodies in. A quick double check showed that it was in the middle of the fastest route between the two locations. Izuku practically dry heaved as it began to form in his mind what was going on. Sir? A waitress asked nervously as she came up to him. Do you need any help? Are you injured? No. Izuku said with a nervous smile and trembling limbs as he got out of his seat. I am sorry for Thakan Ashit. Elhost my Afiadihe, he said with a bloody smile as he walked off. As he walked down the street, people giving him odd looks due to the blood and nose, Izuku looked over the two locations again. Where to go first? To Lady So's, where Goro was most likely picking up the bodies and some back banjo? Or to Kin's, where Goro was most likely being paid for dumping the body by his boss, who taught him the incantation to go into the between? To the restaurant that was possibly cutting up, taking bites out, and most likely selling human flesh? Or to the bar where another sorcerer or monster was waiting? Which den of cannibal humans or human-eating monsters did he want to go deal with first? Chapter 10. The Little Men from Burma. Izuku eyed the small corner restaurant across the street as he changed out the tissues he stuffed up his nostrils to stop the bleeding. He tore up a napkin he had swiped from a cafe on his way and rolled 2 shreds up before gingerly lodging them inside before some fresh blood trickled out. Perhaps restaurant was too strong of a word, it looked barely big enough to hold a couple tables. Takeout place was probably better. Regardless, it had the words, Lady So's Burmese Cuisine, printed on the window. Izuku pulled his normal phone out and pretended to play with as he leaned against a stoplight, casting glances across the street the entire time. Given the choice between the restaurant where people were likely being butchered and killed and the bar where the man or monster in charge of it all, the decision had been easy. If there was even a chance that there was currently a person being held inside, then he needed to rescue them as soon as possible. Kefkok XEXXEX hooped. He whispered when he glanced around and found no one looking at him. He then waited in the between until it was safe to cross the street, the drivers waiting at the light having no idea that in another space a boy was using the crosswalk in front of them. Once he was safely across the street, he walked up to the front window and peered inside, hopeful that he had surely entered the between far enough to avoid detection from any other sorcerer. Despite it being in the middle of the lunch rush on a Saturday, the restaurant was empty. The 2 table pushed off to the side empty, and there was only one person at the counter. What looked like to be a very short person actually. Curious, Izuku moved to the open front door, which was probably propped open to try and invite in customers. He moved to the counter. The cashier sat on a stool and not once looked up from their phone. The person was barely 4 feet tall with light brown skin and was dressed in plain clothing that was sized for the average child. They had a smooth bald head and large ears, the left having a number of stud piercings, a rather sharp small nose, and no eyebrows. But it was the eyes and mouth that caught his attention. The eyes were beady, had red sclera instead of white, and there was no iris around the pupil. But the pupil was not round like a normal person's, instead it was long and thin like a cat's, with the exception that it laid horizontal rather than vertical. The mouth was wide and filled with far too many sharp teeth. From the quick glance Izuku got when the person yawned in boredom, they seemed like they were made of nothing but fangs, with only a few molars. They certainly looked like they could take a bite out of person though. Just like the bite marks on the dead bodies in the subway tunnel. The only other thing that Izuku noticed was that the person in front of him had no fingernails. There was no sign that they had been pulled or removed, they just never grew them. Backing away from them, Izuku looked up at the menu above the counter, scanning it intensely. He had no knowledge of Burmese food, so he had no idea what any of these dishes were or why so many of them offered a white pork variant or side dish. But he certainly didn't see any bak bon jo. He looked around the room and found a picture of the restaurant's opening day. In it were 4 similar-looking little people, with the tallest being, he guessed, around 4.5 feet. But all of them had bald heads, red eyes, and wide sharp smiles. Either this was a home of midget monsters or a family that had inherited the exact same quirk. Did I go to the wrong place? Izuku wondered for a moment as he looked back and forth between the cashier and the menu. The cashier certainly had the chompers to leave the bite marks on the bodies, but they were so small. They were like the size of an 8-year-old. Izuku glanced behind the cashier to the door that presumably led to the kitchen. Should he phase through it and continue investigating? Could he waste time if he had somehow gotten the wrong place? Would he be even able to find the correct place if the receipts from Guro were just wishful thinking? Should he still go to Kin's bar? Growling in frustration, Izuku charged around the counter and made his way towards the door to the kitchen, already preparing to begin the process of phasing through it. If this was the place, then he'd be able to properly plan his attack and how to deal with them. And if it wasn't them, then there had been no harm done aside from some trespassing that they weren't aware of. However, just before Izuku reached the door to the kitchen, his body collided with the very air, stopping him dead in his tracks as his face flattened against nothing. Izuku cried out as his hands flew to his broken nose to try and somehow soothe the pain. He backed away and blinked, perplexed at what just happened. Cautiously he inched forward, his right hand extended before him. Soon his fingers brushed against something solid and smooth where there was nothing. Oyhou gotta bwe kidding me? Izuku whispered through his freshly injured nose. This was a fucking invisible wall. At least it cleared up whether or not this was the place he was looking for. Izuku quickly began to feel out the general shape of the invisible wall and found that it was a few inches away from the actual wall behind the counter. But once he got near the corners, the invisible wall cornered itself towards the back wall. It was at these corners that Izuku noticed the small strange carving in the tiling at his feet. The carving was only about 2 inches in diameter and was made up of a number of curved connected lines inside of a rough circle. At the center was where the invisible wall cornered and went towards the back wall. Looking around and eventually up at the ceiling, Izuku found similar carving directly above the others. Are these connection points or something? Izuku wondered to himself. The floor ones connect to make a bottom line just like the ceiling ones do for the top line. Then the floor and ceiling spot connect to make the sides. Then you have a wall. Or rather, considering that the invisible wall continued into the back wall once it cornered, a cube with another set of connection points somewhere further into the building. So, does it keep out sorcerers or humans? Izuku thought as he cast a glance at the little person still bored and browsing the internet. If it kept out sorcerers, then does that mean that none of these little people were sorcerers? Or were they actually not humans at all and just very short human-eating monsters? And with either, how did Guro come to pick up the dead bodies? If it was set for humans, then how could they bring in the people they cut up? Could they turn it off and on like an electric fence? Sighing, Izuku brought up his hand and placed it firmly on the invisible wall. He then cleared his mind and tried to phase through the barrier. After a few minutes of no progress, he gave up. Haven't even gotten good enough to walk through things without it taking a few minutes, and I've already found something that I can't get through. Great. Izuku thought sourly, hoping that this wasn't a common spell like being able to travel to the between seemed to be. He rubbed his hands over his face and sighed. Maybe it only works in the between, Izuku suddenly thought, and backing into the corner he turned to face the cashier and pulled out his revolver to point it at them. If they felt him come out, then he wasn't about to be defenseless against whatever spells they had. UFG cast WLOFGH, he said carefully due to his nose, and was back in the real world. With the gun held in one hand, he reached out towards the invisible wall and felt his fingers brush against it. Well, it seemed that this invisible wall could in fact cross dimensions. He didn't even want to begin to think about how that worked. Kefkok XEXXEX hooped. He whispered and re-entered the between, the cashier never even noticing him. Maybe there's a back door, he thought as he put his revolver away and walked out of the restaurant. Izuku would indeed find a back door in the alleyway behind the restaurant, but his attempts to phase through it ended when he encountered the other side of the invisible cube about an inch out of the door. Once again he was left trying to soothe the pain in his tender nose. I can't sneak around this time, Izuku realized as he sat in the alleyway looking up at the green sky and line of planets going off into nothingness. What in the hell do I do? Theory sighed as he flicked his thumb across the screen of his phone, flying through the news reports of the day. It seemed that there was absolutely nothing interesting happening today, which made sitting through his shift as cashier almost unbearable. He leaned back and rubbed his sore back, wishing that his mother would get around to buying a proper chair with back support instead of this damn stool. He smacked his lips and hummed. I wonder if mother would mind if I snuck back and grabbed a snack. Not like we're going to get anything other than regulars. And, just to prove him wrong, at that moment a teenage boy walked in. Theory rose a hairless eyebrow as he looked the boy up and down. He had a mass of green hair and green eyes that looked at him nervously. His t-shirt and coat had flecks of blood on it, and his nose was stuffed with red tissues and looked broken. He put his phone away as the boy walked up the counter, something odd in his stride. But since his head wasn't starting to ache, it seemed he was also quirkless. At least he wouldn't have to deal with that while taking his order. Dude, the hell happened to you? Theory asked as he pointed to the boy's broken nose. I got mugged earlier, the boy explained, doing his best to speak clearly. But, a guy the first no told me about this place. He said that you sell pretty good food. They're fucking with you pretty hard there, human. But that ain't my problem, Theory thought as he smiled and leaned back on his stool. Well, I'll be sure to pass on the praise to my mama. Now, welcome to Lady So's. What can I help you with? The teenager looked over the menu above them for a moment before sighing and looking back at him. I'm sorry, but the dish that was recommended to me doesn't seem to be on the menu. Huh, that's odd, Theory said, a little bit confused. Can you tell me what they suggested you try? I may butcher the words, so I apologize in advance, the teenager said with a nervous smile. I believe it was Back Bonjo? Theory's blood nearly went cold and he had to stop himself from falling off of his stool. Oh, really? He said nervously with a loud gulp. That's, a special item we usually only serve to long-time customers, due to it being difficult to get the ingredients. Theory lied. May I ask who recommended that to you? Oh, it was a dude named Guro Murata. The teenager answered easily, and this time Theory's blood did go cold. What the fuck are you doing, Guro? He screamed in his mind. Mama and Uncle Kin are going to fucking rip you apart and prepare a feast with you. He said that it would suit my peculiar tastes, the teenager said with a nervous laugh and a small smile. And what kind of taste is that? Theory asked cautiously, astonished that this was happening right now. I've always wanted to try a different kind of meat, the teenage boy explained evasively with a shrug. Is that what this white pork stuff is? I've never heard of it before. Is this really fucking happening? Theory thought. This boy had just walked in, asked for mashed human brains mixed with crushed maggots at the recommendation of Guro, and was now asking about the human flesh they sometimes mixed in with their dishes. They usually had to trick walk-ins to order white pork added with their meals. After a few times they would grow a liking to it and become regular, if not knowing, cannibals. They never had an aspiring cannibal just walk in and try to feel out if they served human flesh. "I need to talk to my mother about this," Theory said as he climbed down from his stool and backed into the kitchen. "I'll be right back." Once safely in the kitchen, he whirled around to find his mother stirring something in a pot while his twin brother chopped vegetables, both having to stand on stools to reach the normal-sized tables and equipment. "Theory," his mother shouted when she saw him. "What are you doing back here?" "Mama," he whispered as he ran to her. "There's a human boy here asking for backbone Joe and white pork. He says Guro told him about us." "Guro did what?" she cried out as she jumped off her stool. "By the twins, I'm going to cut off his arms and legs, make a stew from the limbs, and fucking spoon-feed it to him." "Mama," Theory said as he tried to calm her, "he says that Guro told him because he has peculiar tastes and wanted to try a different kind of meat." "Seriously?" she asked, raising a hairless eyebrow. "Fine, makes no difference to me if we help someone become a cannibal instead of tricking them into it. Go get a sample of backbone Joe and I'll grill some white pork quick." She turned and looked at his twin brother who was still chopping vegetables. "Shit. Go out and keep the human company. Make sure he doesn't go anywhere. If he leaves, call out and try to stop him." His brother nodded and set his knife aside. While Chit went out the kitchen door to man the counter, their mother went to the fridge and pulled out a plastic bag which contained a single square lump of flesh about an inch thick. It was the standard amount of meat that they cut away from human captives and added into their meals as white pork. He walked towards the back room as she got a pan out and started heating it on the stove top. Getting the step ladder out, he climbed it to reach the latch on the door and unlocked it, grunting as he pulled the door open due to his small size. The back room was small and only had a table with straps at each corner meant to hold a person in place, a few cabinets filled with equipment, and a miniature fridge. The table was empty, as they wouldn't be receiving a new human for another couple days, but was stained deeply with blood. Walking to the mini fridge, he opened it and pulled out a small Tupperware bowl. Popping open the lid, he smelled the grayish paste and found it still fresh. Moving to the cabinets, he found a small spoon and scooped some out. Resealing the lid, he put the bowl away and walked out of the back room. "I mean, there's no shame getting your ass kicked in a fight," he heard his brother Chit say as he walked out of the kitchen to the front counter. Chit had taken his spot on the stool behind the register. "As long as the other guy looks a lot worse." "Yeah, that he does," the teenage boy said with a quiet voice. "Sorry for the wait," Theory said as he came up to the counter, having to stand on his tiptoes to be able to hand over the spoon of backbone Joe. "Here, this is a sample of our backbone Joe. Our mother is working on getting you some grilled white pork to taste." "Oh, thank you," the boy said as he took the spoon and looked it over. He brought it to his face and tried to sniff it even though his nose was broken and stuffed with tissues. "So," Theory said after some time watching the human boy examining the mashed human brains mixed with crushed maggots, "you going to eat it or what?" "Oh," the boy exclaimed and raised his free hand in a panic. "I'm just waiting for that white pork sample. That way I can see how they taste together." "That's exactly like how I like to eat them," Chit laughed. "I like to take 2 pieces of white pork and make a sandwich with backbone Joe as the filling. Mama said that if you do that again she'll whip your ass for wasting backbone Joe," Theory reminded, and Chit waved it away. "How old are you guys?" the teenage boy asked suddenly as he looked them over. "I'm sorry if it's a bit rude, but with your quirks it's hard to tell." "We're 13. Chit answered immediately, smiling at his brother at the mention of their quirk. What obviously went unsaid was that 13 for their people wasn't the same thing for humans. Comparatively, they were closer to a 19-year-old. "Is it just you 4 who work here?" the boy asked, and he fiddled with his spoon. "I saw the picture over there." He gestured to the photo on the wall of the opening day of the restaurant. "Nah," Theory answered as he gazed over at the picture. "It's just us and our mom. The tall one is our Uncle Kin." "Does he happen to own a bar?" The boy asked suddenly. Guro mentioned that he went to a kin's bar? Yeah, that's our uncle's place. Shit answered. Guro takes him some back bon joe every couple of weeks. Theory reached up and slapped his brother upside the head while glaring at him. Don't go bothering a customer with needless shit, he ordered, angry at his brother for revealing how often Guro came by to pick up back bon joe for their uncle, and also pick up their dead human to dispose of. And you stop fucking cursing in front of them, their mother said as she exited the kitchen with a small plate of grilled white pork with a knife and fork. Here you go, sir. Some simple white pork to whet your appetite. The teenage boy took the plate and gulped as he looked at the square piece of meat, the three little people eagerly waiting for him to start eating. Do you keep all of your white pork as little squares pieces? He asked as he examined the meat. About an inch thick? Yes. Their mother answered, confused. Why? Just relieved that I have the right place, and that you're all out here. He gave a big smile as he set the spoon of back bon joe on the plate and set the plate on the counter. Do you have any alive humans in the back? What? Shit asked quietly as a sweat broke out on the back of Theory's neck. We don't do that here. He lied. We get the meat from suppliers. You're lying. The teenager said as his hand went into his coat pocket and pulled out a revolver. You kill them here and have Guro dump them in a subway tunnel in the between on his way to your uncle's place. He said as he raised his revolver and pulled the hammer back. I've seen about 38 of them. You fucking human shit. Their mother cried as she leapt onto the counter, mouth open and teeth ready to rip out the human boy's throat. Shit and Theory quickly followed suit, Shit jumping over the register. The boy, however, was quick enough to raise his gun and fire a shot dead center into their mother's chest. She flew back and landed on the floor behind the counter, staring up at the ceiling with dead eyes as a pool of blood spread around her. He wasn't quick enough to stop Chit from landing on his right arm and biting into his bicep, the blood flowing out around his sharp teeth. As Theory climbed onto the counter, the human screamed in pain and transferred his revolver over to his left hand and desperately beat it against Chit's head. However, mad with the taste of blood, the little red-eyed monster held on and continued to weigh the teenage boy down. So, with one hand, the boy cocked his revolver again and pressed the barrel against Chit's forehead. Chit's eyes looked up at the barrel for a moment before the boy pulled the trigger and blew Chit's brains out all over the wall. So Theory was left standing on the counter as Chit's body slid off of the teenager and fell to the floor. He looked at the teenager, who quickly cocked his revolver once again and was bringing it up to aim at him. But before he could do that, Theory raised his hands over his head. All right, I give up, he said plainly. What do you want? What? The teenager asked, confused and panting due to the pain in his right bicep, which was bleeding heavily from the tooth marks visible through his coat. You win. Theory shrugged. You got a gun with 4 more shots and mentioned the between, which means you're also a sorcerer. I ain't winning this fight. I just killed your mother and brother, he shouted, genuinely perplexed. And? Theory asked with a raised hairless eyebrow. We ain't soft-hearted like you humans. My mom did all I needed her to when she gave birth to me, and my brother was just an annoyance. What are you? The boy asked quietly, looking over his strange appearance again. We call ourselves Cho-Cho. The strange little person in front of Izuku answered. We come from Burma, although the humans there wouldn't count us as countrymen. We've really managed to get around, he said with a wide smile of sharp teeth. Thank the twins for quirks. Is there anybody human back there? Izuku asked, the pain in his right arm making it difficult to focus. He had been having conversations with actual monsters for the past few minutes. He had gotten used to the blue iguanas and flying herd of giant red jellyfish in the between, but this was something else entirely. Nah. The little red-eyed creature answered. We aren't getting a delivery for another couple days. I'd ask you to come back then, but after this, he gestured around at his dead family members, I don't think we'll be getting any more for a while. How do I know you aren't lying to me? Izuku asked through gritted teeth. The adrenaline and anger and getting confirmation that this was a home of human torturing and eating monsters was wearing off. It helped him to attack them, but he was losing it fast. Because I don't have nearly big enough balls to do something like that. He joked. Trust me, if we did, my mother would have cut your sample of white pork right from the source so it would be as fresh as possible. Would have taken much longer to cook. What is the invisible wall thing? Izuku asked as he began to listen for any sound of approaching sirens. He had fired 2 shots in the middle of the day. It wouldn't take long for the police to get here. Something Uncle Kin put in. The little monster shrugged. Keeps out sorcerers. It's a cultural thing. High-status women become cooks like my mama and men become sorcerers like Uncle Kin. But as you might guess, one is a bit more powerful than the other. He smiled again. So the ladies get these little barriers to keep the big strong menfolk out. Who they need to set up the barriers in the first place, but you know how it is. Why do you eat people? Izuku asked, beginning to run out questions that he felt he needed answered. Because you taste delicious. The little monster answered honestly, and we aren't a bunch of little vegetarian pussies like my aunt's family. He shifted his feet a little. There are also other benefits, but you'd have to ask my uncle about them. Why shouldn't I kill you? Izuku asked, never thinking that he'd ever say that sentence in his life. But now he was beginning to wonder why he had. This thing before him was a literal monster, a thing playing at being human due to the appearance of quirks making its appearance less suspect. It had either had a hand in or stood by while humans were brought in and tortured to death and cut up to be eaten. And it had confirmed that it ate human flesh. He had every right to kill this thing in front of him and would in fact probably be killed himself if he failed to do so by his little group. The monster stalled for a moment. Because I got my hands up and I'm surrendering? He answered with a smile. I mean, what would a hero do, man? You caught the bad guy. Good for you. Izuku stared at the monster in front of him as he took deep calming breaths, his left hand trembling as it held his revolver up. A hero does 2 things. Izuku said slowly, the blood from his arm wound dripping onto his red shoes and blending in. He saves the innocent and helpless when they are in danger. And, he paused and hardened his features and heart, he punishes evil whenever he finds it. There was just under 40 bodies in that subway tunnel you're all responsible for. I don't need to know the laws in and out to know that that deserves death. The monster began to turn to jump and run away into the kitchen. So I'll carry out the punishment. Izuku fired into the monster's back and it flew off the counter, crashing into the wall and falling behind the counter. Izuku walked slowly around the counter and found him face down in the floor, wheezing into a growing pool of blood. 3 cho. The monster struggled to say as he looked up at Izuku. For 39 humans, good deal. The monster made one final effort to spit a bloody loogie at Izuku before his breathing slowed and stopped. Izuku sighed and slipped his revolver into his coat pocket and then looked at his bloody and damaged right arm. He tried to lift it up and hissed in pain. One more. Izuku whispered. Still got one more place to go. I can do it. He looked around the room and winced as he heard sirens approaching. Got to get rid of everything I can. Don't need more trails than necessary. By the time that the police arrived at the restaurant, all they found were a few fresh blood stains on the ground, bullet holes in the walls but no casings, a bare counter, and a fresh blood trail leading towards the door but stopping suddenly in the middle of the room. As if whoever had been bleeding there had suddenly healed or disappeared into thin air. Chapter 11. First case closed. With a shaky left hand, Izuku lifted his revolver and fired at the blue iguanas that were trying to sneak up behind him. He missed by a good 3 feet, but it was enough to scare the little opportunists off. With a grunt he turned back around and continued on his way, struggling to put his revolver back into his coat. His right arm hung limply at his side, and while he had stopped bleeding, he could barely manage to lift his arm up or even make a fist without hissing in pain. The people around him on the sidewalk had no idea that a 14-year-old boy was limping past them, blood covering his clothes and a single driving mission on his mind. He had to get to Kin's bar. He had to get there before the police contacted him about what had happened to his family at Lady So's. He had to get to him before he could run away and either figuratively or literally disappear into thin air. Almost there. Not much farther. Izuku whispered to himself as he almost stumbled into an alleyway, doing his best to go in as straight of a line from Lady So's to Kin's bar as he could. I'll question him about where and how they were getting people delivered. Then I'll kill him. He stopped, leaning against a wall as his vision swam. Then, call Ms. Entertainer. Tell her what happened, get healed. Bring Akari's body back. Go home. With this plan he staggered on for 4 blocks, having to stop several times to save himself from collapsing. Until eventually he came to a quiet street with a nothing in particular except a little neon sign saying, Kin's Bar, with an arrow pointing down a small set of stairs to an underground establishment. Given that it was the middle of the day, not that you could tell in the between, the sign was off, but it seemed the bar was open for those who thought drinking at just past noon was a good idea. Easing his way down the stairs, Izuku walked through the open door into the small bar. There was a small collection of liquor bottles behind the modest bar with only 3 stools, which was the only place to sit other than 2 booths and a table on the opposite side of the room. There was a TV mounted above the bar showing some sort of game show that the bartender was watching, their back to the door as they leaned on the bar. They were the only person in the bar. From behind, Izuku could tell that the bartender was a little person, around 4.5 feet tall. They were wearing a bartender's suit and perplexingly had short black hair and a hat on. The Cho-Chos at Lady So's had all been bald, and seemed in general to be hairless, as had Kin been in the family photo he'd seen. Limping along to look at the bartender's face, he found the familiar red beady eyes, thin horizontal pupils, large ears, and large mouth filled with sharp teeth. He also found that this Cho-Cho had a thin black mustache, far too small to cover the entirety of his wide upper lip. After spending a moment just staring at this odd-looking Cho-Cho, Izuku shrugged and made his way behind the bar so he could stand behind the Cho-Cho he presumed to be Kin, who was in fact standing on a small stool. He pulled out his revolver and snapped the cylinder out, which took some doing with one hand. The bullets tumbled out and he picked up the 2 he hadn't fired after dealing with Lady So's and scaring off blue iguanas. Those 2 plus the 9 he still had in his pockets left him with 11 shots of the original 18. But that was fine. He knew from experience that Cho-Chos weren't hard to kill. Loading his revolver fully once again, Izuku snapped the cylinder closed and cocked the hammer back as he got into position. He pointed his revolver at the back of Kin's right knee. Izuku took a deep breath he didn't need before speaking. UFG CASWLOFGH. He spoke and came out of the between. The Cho-Cho in front of him bristled as he felt the spell, but before he could turn around, Izuku pulled the trigger on his revolver and fired. The shot tore through the little Cho-Cho's right knee, sending him tumbling to the ground behind the bar with a scream of agony. It also sent his hat and hair flying, revealing that he had been wearing a toupee. That's so you can't get away, Izuku thought as watched the little monster scream in pain and confusion. Now so you won't be casting any spells. If he hadn't been a murderer and general bastard, Izuku would have thanked Guro for the lesson he taught him about how to quickly nullify a sorcerer. Izuku limped over to the Cho-Cho and with all the strength he could muster brought his foot down on the monster's face when he managed to turn and look up at him. He did this again and again until he got a satisfying cracking sound and a weak muffled cry from the Cho-Cho to let him know that he had successfully broken his nose. With the Cho-Cho successfully immobilized and unable to cast spells until he learned to speak through his injury, Izuku leaned down and muttered, Kefkok xexxex hooped. With that they were safely in the between and Izuku stood back up, cocking his revolver again and keeping it aimed down at the Cho-Cho. Kin, right? Izuku asked, and the Cho-Cho glared up at him with a snarl before nodding his head. I know what you were and what you've been doing, Cho-Cho. Ah fucking figured thought OHUUT, Kin said through his broken nose. You been busy? He asked as he looked at Izuku's injured right arm. Your family and Guro are dead, Izuku revealed, but instead of being shocked, Kin just raised a hairless eyebrow. Goho? Kin asked, confused. Hood, Tish is his fault? Right? He killed a local woman. Dumped her with all the other people you butchered and ate, Izuku growled fiercely. She. That's YYHOUNHEVEHRGHO for Lyokles. Kin explained. Boot burring in from Overshays, he trailed off, referring to their victims that seemingly had no native Japanese people among them. How did you do that? Izuku asked, getting around to the one piece of information he still needed. Where were you getting them from? The Twins Syndicate. Kin said carefully and clearly after a moment of thought. Izuku had almost shot him when he heard him speaking without any trouble, now on alert for any sign of a spell. Named Fatir are goads, Loigor and Zar. He explained, and Izuku was left wondering if that was how their names were actually pronounced or if Kin's broken nose was butchering it. There's a crime syndicate run by Cho, Izuku asked, confused. How? You're not very intimidating. Magic helps. Kin chuckled and then hissed in pain as a hand went to comfort his nose. The Syndicate L hooks OHUT for all Cho. Thanks Frotecthian M honey in return. So it's just like any other crime family then? Izuku said, perplexed. You come to human cities and kidnap and smuggle people from all over the world to torture and eat just to play Yakuza? Shit mhan, we go to do something. Kin shrugged as if that was a perfectly valid answer. Plus there are benefits to hating you guys. Like what? Izuku asked, remembering that the last Cho had mentioned a mysterious benefit to them eating human meat. Cho that had wit fork all their leaves, are blessed by the twins. Kin said quietly. Honorhead elders, they have visions that guide our race. Where are the people being smuggled in from? What, port or city? Izuku asked, tired and ready for this case or job or whatever it was to be over. All over. Kin shrugged. But we got ours mostly from Osaka. He sniffed and only winced a little. All right then, thanks. Izuku said as he pulled the trigger on his revolver and sent a bullet into Kin's forehead. Blood and brains splattered out behind him and he collapsed fully onto the ground, staring up at the ceiling. Oh, God. Izuku sighed as his left arm fell to his side, all of the stress and pain of the day crashing down on him. He nearly collapsed himself in relief that it was all finally over. It's over. Thank you. Thank you. Not quite, Kin said as he sat back up, a smirk on his face. That stung, but you'll have to try a lot harder than that. He grinned as the hole in his forehead began to close up before Izuku's eyes. Izuku felt his skin crawl in a terrible way. Magic. How? Izuku asked, his voice small and terrified as he took a step back. Why, you never said a spell. You couldn't have said the words properly. You're right. Kin agreed as he shook his right leg and his knee reassembled itself under his pant leg. He cautiously stood up and stretched, but I didn't need to use an incantation to do this. He gestured to his face where his nose was setting itself straight with a pop. This is the result of a ritual I do every morning. I can heal my wounds as quickly as I please, unless they're fatal, which triggers it immediately to stop me from dying. He grinned wickedly at Izuku, showing off his fangs. I think you'll agree that it's a fucking good spell. Lasts all day too, as long as I never have to use it. Now you were pretty entertaining, kid. Kin complimented as he peeled off his little mustache and set it on the bar, revealing it to be fake like his hair. Certainly more so than that garbage. He gestured to the game show on the TV above them. So I'll give you, let's say, a 15-second head start. Sound good? Izuku responded by cocking his revolver and firing again, this time hitting Kin in the stomach. Ah! He cried out in pain as the hole already started to close up before blood started to flow out. Unlike the shot to the head where the bullet had traveled through, this time the slug popped out of the body before the wound closed, clattering to the ground. Okay, that just ruined my vest and shirt. So thanks for that, asshole. Izuku took a cautious step back as his mind raced at what to do. How did you kill something that couldn't be killed? This was so unlike Guro or the other Chos. He could and had handled them with some difficulty. But this was impossible. He was in over his head. He had to call the entertainer. You should really start running, Kin advised as his skin began to slowly twitch and lurch in place all over his body. The healing ritual isn't the only thing I do every morning. But I'll give you another handicap. I'll stay in the between as long as you do. He smiled at Izuku, who took another step back. Wouldn't want to bother to good people out there, would we? Izuku turned and hobbled out of the bar as fast as he could, terror aiding him in his retreat. 15 seconds. Kin shouted after him with a laugh. UFG cast WLOFGH. Izuku shouted almost immediately when he reached the top of the stairs and stuffed his revolver back into his coat pocket. He shuffled as fast as he could down the empty street, fumbling to get his work phone out and dialing the one number listed in his contacts. Come on. Pick up. Pick up. He whispered harshly as he counted the seconds down in his mind and the phone dialed in his ear. Yellow. The entertainer answered pleasantly. Done already, slug. I'm fucked. Izuku interrupted, stopping his retreat next to a large van. Monster sorcerer. Heals quick. Can't die. Hurt. Help. He shouted, trying to get the critical information across as quickly as possible. Where are you? The entertainer asked with a sigh, not sounding particularly bothered by his very possible imminent death. Izuku quickly gave her the address of Kin's bar as he swung his head back to see if Kin was after him yet. All right, give me a minute. And with that she hung up on him. Before Izuku could process that, he felt a familiar crawling of his skin and turned around away from looking at Kin's bar in time for a fist to strike him right in the jaw. Okay. I gave you the between handicap and you just leave it right away? A deep voice asked, and Izuku's eyes widened as he looked up at the giant naked Cho-Cho before him. But fine, you want everyone to see you get killed and eaten by a naked man, that's on you. Kin had nearly doubled in size, growing to be around 9 feet tall and putting on considerable muscles. His teeth had also somehow elongated, the numerous fangs becoming as long as Izuku's fingers, and it made it difficult for him to figure out how Kin was even talking. There was tatters of clothing hanging off of his shoulders from when he had apparently burst out of his clothing during his transformation. Izuku dropped his cell phone and reached for his coat pocket to try and pull his revolver out. But Kin quickly lunged forward and punched him in the gut, striking him so hard that he lifted the boy off the ground and sending him falling onto his hand and knees. You know, Kin said as Izuku gasped for breath on the sidewalk, by syndicate rules I should be tying you up so that they can question you about how you found out about us and who you could have told. Kin brought his left foot down on Izuku's back, the force of the impact causing his wound to reopen and fresh blood to begin to flow out. Izuku also saw that Cho-Cho lacked toenails along with their lack fingernails, which he was currently thankful for, as he was sure that they'd have grown into claws capable of ripping his flesh apart. But that would be a waste. Kin continued on as Izuku clutched his bleeding arm and tried to crawl backwards away from the monster. You already explained that Guro killed some local broad. I can imagine the trail he left right to us. Kin grinned, showing off his large fangs. You know how many times I wanted to rip his throat out while he sat at my bar and complained about his shitty luck. Why are you telling me this? Izuku asked through gritted teeth, stopping as he leaned against the large van. He eyed the opening between the curb and the bottom of the van. Because I can think of a much better purpose for you. I don't use this spell often. He lifted his arms and admired his new muscles, but when I do, well, it's always a good time. He closed his eyes and sighed, his skin lurching in place all over his body, and he gasped pleasantly in surprise. Oh, I can feel it. Won't be long until I'm completely gone. For a few minutes at least. Now when I go, Kin said as he opened his eyes again, revealing that they had changed from red to a deep orange. I won't be able to talk sensibly, so just so you know. He leaned down to whisper to Izuku. I am going to do something that my people haven't done in a long time. His tongue snaked out his mouth and licked his wide lips. Hunt a human down like the dumb scared animal you are. Kin took a deep breath and smiled. Oh, I can taste your blood already. It's been so long since I had fresh meat. With that declaration, Kin shot his right hand forward to grab Izuku, only for the boy to roll to his side and fall underneath the large van. Izuku hissed in pain as his right arm hit the street and quickly scooted as far from the curb as he could get. With little space to move around, it was difficult for him to fish his revolver out and to cock it. Oh, you think you're quick, huh? Kin shouted as he fell to the sidewalk and peered at Izuku under the van. Good. Food always tastes better when you gotta fight for it. Izuku responded by firing his revolver and hitting Kin in the left shoulder. And that's shot number 4. Kin shouted with glee, orange eyes gleaming merrily. Are you in one of those slow learner classes at your school? He asked as his wound closed up and the slug popped out onto the sidewalk. Kin reached his left hand out to try and grab Izuku, who continued to scoot away from the monster, now nearing the edge of the van to the open street. Alright, fuck this. Kin growled as his swipes to grab Izuku proved fruitless. He stood back up and Izuku was treated to the sight of his bare feet before there was a deep growl from Kin and the skin Izuku could begin to see started to lurch and stretch. Kefcock xexxex hooped. Izuku hastily whispered to enter the between. He didn't know if Kin could feel him casting the spell from this distance, but he hoped that the Cho-Cho would be too busy doing whatever he was doing to notice. Scooting out onto the street, after checking that no cars were coming, Izuku stood and pressed his back against the van. I'm fucked. Izuku thought dejectedly as he looked down at his revolver with 2 more shots in it. He had 5 more in his pockets, but they did fuck all against Kin, who, judging by the deepening growls and other sounds behind the van, was getting bigger and stronger. There's no way that I can get away this beat up and I can't kill him. He breathed in sharply as he looked up at the bright green void and endless string of planets. And there's no way that the entertainer can get here in time. Why? Why didn't I fucking call for help soon? Izuku's self-flagellation was cut short by the arrival of a police cruiser, sirens blaring, onto the quiet street. They had likely been called due to the 2 gunshots that Izuku had fired while in the real world, but the sight of Kin, standing naked on the sidewalk having some kind of seizure, certainly caught their attention. No. Izuku panicked as the police stopped in the middle of the street and got out of their cruiser. They approached Kin cautiously from behind, hands cautiously on their sidearms. Both were male, but one of them had a quirk that made him look like a light brown cat with yellow eyes. He even had a little bell around his neck. The other looked like a normal man in his mid-30s with short black hair and brown eyes. Sir. The cat cop shouted to Kin. Are you all right? Where are your clothes? We received word of a gunshot only a few minutes ago. Izuku dragged his way around the back of the van as the police officers cautiously approached Kin. Then he rounded the corner and saw what Kin had become. Before, Kin had been around 9 feet tall, but now he was closer to 12 and the amount of muscles on his body increased to match. His face had elongated, making it look much like a horse's, his nose and melded in with his new long face, giving him 2 small nostrils above his upper lip, and his lips couldn't fit over his teeth and gums anymore, showing off his long fangs constantly. Finally his eyes had sunken into craters, leaving his beady orange eyes to glow faintly in the shadow they cast. Hello, officers! Kin screamed as he turned and stood at his full height, easily over twice as tall as both of them. My, what fine response time the police have! The pride of Japan, surely. His tongue snaked out past his fangs and trailed over them hungrily. Now I don't need a headache to know that you've got a quirk, Catman. He turned to look at the average-looking police officer. You, on the other hand, I feel nothing from you. Izuku's blood went cold at what Kin was insinuating. I could always use another dish. Before the police officers could draw their weapons, Kin rushed to them and swatted the cat cop away into the street with a swing of his left arm. With him out of the way, he grabbed the other police officer around the middle with both hands and began to lift him up off the ground. He opened his mouth and began to drool at the meal in front of him. No! Izuku screamed as he leapt out from behind the van and rushed to Kin and the officer. He stopped next to Kin's left wrist and placed the barrel of his revolver against it, cocking the hammer back. Gotta be quick, he thought as Kin slowly lifted the officer up, who began to scream for help. UFGQASWLOFGH. He shouted to exit the between. Once he was back in the real world, Izuku did 2 things. The first was to fire his revolver, putting a bullet straight through Kin's left wrist and embedding it in his right. The second was jumping up and throwing his body on top of Kin's wrists. The wounds and the extra weight forced Kin to let go of the police officer, who stumbled back and fell on his ass, staring at the injured boy who had appeared out of thin air. Run! Get out of here! Izuku screamed as Kin roared and flung his arms up into the air, sending Izuku flying as well. But he never hit the ground as Kin caught him in midair by his right arm, causing Izuku to scream in pain. "There you are," Kin screamed in his face, holding the boy 8 feet off the ground as the cops stood back up and pulled out their weapons. "I was wondering where your scent went." "Lower the boy to the ground, slowly," the cat cop ordered. "Kefkok xexxex hooked." Izuku hissed, and before the police officer's eyes both he and Kin disappeared into thin air. Kin somehow hummed while also screaming, moving away from the confused police officers to stand in the middle of the street. "What, want a private conversation? That's fine. I can get to the quirkless officer after I'm done with you." Izuku grimaced and raised his revolver to Kin's large head, cocking the hammer back once again. "Alright, I was joking earlier, but are you actually slow? You know that doesn't do anything." "I know," Izuku whispered, mostly to himself. This was it. He had only one bullet left. He was injured to the point that he couldn't run away. He was caught by a monster that he could not hope to beat. There was no help coming for him, and if it was going to arrive too late. All that awaited him was a painful death as some monster's meal. But he did have one bullet left. "I'm sorry," he whispered to everyone, but mostly to his mother. Slowly he turned his revolver away from Kin and brought it to his head, the barrel resting against his temple. "What? Pussying out?" Kin laughed cruelly, his grip tightening around Izuku's right arm and making the bones under his palm snap, making Izuku cry out in pain. "Fine. No skin off my nose." Kin stopped speaking as Izuku's skin began to crawl, both of them feeling the presence of magic in the air. They both looked around, wondering where the source of magic could be, and they both landed their gaze to the front of Kin's bar. The air was twisting in place on the sidewalk in front of the stairs that led down to the little bar. Looking at the shifting mirage proved difficult, as the longer looked at it the more his surroundings seemed to stretch out away and blend together from it. He was getting serious tunnel vision. "The fuck?" Kin asked as he looked at the odd anomaly with him. "What's going on?" As if to answer him, the entertainer stepped out of the strange illusion, carrying a long briefcase in her right hand. "Who the hell are you?" Kin asked, and the entertainer turned away from the bar to look at them as the twisting air next to her faded away. She frowned at what she saw and walked slowly towards them, ignoring the confused police officers down the street who were calling for backup on their radios. "Hey, a slugger," she greeted Izuku calmly. "Sorry I'm late. The librarian keeps this fucking thing inside a safe inside of another safe," she explained, lifting up the long suitcase for emphasis. Hello, Ms. Entertainer," Izuku said weakly, lowering the revolver from his head, ashamed and relieved. "Thank you for coming." "No problem, kid." The entertainer smiled and shrugged. "We all called for help on our first job. Hell, I did it on my first 3. "What the hell is going on?" Kin roared, angry at being ignored. "Who the hell are you, bitch?" "I'm the entertainer." She introduced herself as she set the suitcase down on the street and kneeled down to open it. "I hear you can't be killed. That right?" "This little shit has put enough bullets in me to kill a Ganoff Keh," he shouted, assuming that both of them knew what a Ganoff K even was. "So you can save whatever little weapon you've got in there, sweetheart." "Well, it is a weapon," the entertainer admitted as she pulled out a sheathed katana, the sheath and handle wrapping a bright red. She looked up at Izuku, hanging by one arm. "Tired of hanging around, kid? Think you can get down?" "Why, yes," Izuku shouted as he brought his revolver to Kin's wrist and fired his last shot through it once again. "Ah!" Again with the wrist. Kin shouted as Izuku used the last of his strength to swing his legs up to Kin's elbow and then push himself away. Kin dropped the boy 8 feet to the pavement, where he landed on his legs and collapsed to the ground with a groan. "Slugger! Catch!" the entertainer shouted as she drew the katana from its sheath and threw the sheath to Izuku. The boy was far beyond the point of questions and did as she said, letting go of his revolver to clutch the bright red sheath. "All right. That's it," Kin screamed. "I'm done with this." His skin began to lurch and stretch once again, beginning another level of transformation. The entertainer raised an eyebrow to this as curved horns began to pierce the skin at the top of his skull and he started to get taller. She merely shrugged and held out the katana, which had a chipped and untended blade that looked like it would crack with little strain. The entertainer gave one quick slash to the air in front of her and everything went to hell. Where the chipped and rough blade traveled, the air split and opened to an ocean of blackness littered with stars. This grew and grew until Izuku and Kin could see clearly what was on the other side of the split. In the distance was a gas giant planet of light brown color with a ring of asteroids. Saturn. The entertainer had opened a portal. Tear. A whatever to a point in space orbiting the planet Saturn. Izuku and Kin both stood, or laid in Izuku's case, stunned at the sight before them. Until the entertainer gently planted the point of the katana into the pavement and the vacuum of space suddenly became hungry. Ah! Kin screamed in terror as he was ripped off the ground and pulled towards the tear in time and space. UFGQA. He tried to scream the words to get out of the between, but it was too late. He was already through the tear and gently floating towards Saturn, his flailing limbs slowing and eventually stilling. Meanwhile, Izuku didn't feel the slightest bit of wind pull him towards the tear to space in front of him. He did watch helplessly as his revolver went flying into the void, too stunned at what he was seeing to try and catch it. After a moment, the entertainer pulled the katana's point off of the ground and the vacuum of space stopped as easily as it started. "You like it?" the entertainer asked as she walked around the tear calmly. The librarian named it the Saturn Blade. For obvious reasons. She explained as she hooked a thumb over her shoulder to point at the planet visible before them. "Sheath, please." Numbly, Izuku handed it over, and when she sheathed the blade, the tear healed itself before his eyes, leaving no evidence that it had ever existed. "Sue," the entertainer started as she looked down at the broken and battered boy, and more police sirens could be heard in the distance. "How'd your first job go?" "Good job." That was all the entertainer said after he had given his report on what had happened and before she started healing him. They had left the street, which was soon swarmed with cops and even a few heroes on the hunt for the disappeared boy and villain. Aside from picking up his dropped cell phone, there was nothing left for him there. She had then dragged him off to some alleyway where he had given his summary of his efforts. She had nodded along and made no real comments. But she was happy, giving him the two-word praise before laying her hands on him and beginning to heal him. After that, he had been in so much pain that nothing else mattered and he fell unconscious for 2 hours. He awoke in what the entertainer said was her apartment and was kicked out before he could get all of his faculties, not given more than a "see you in another month and a half." With that, Izuku was officially done with his first job, his body healed of all damage but his clothes almost completely ruined. But before he could go home, in the between, naturally to avoid any stares or questions, Izuku went back to the subway tunnel. After checking that no train was coming anytime soon, Izuku went back into the tunnel, walking past the bodies that earlier had horrified him to discover. Now he gave them no more than a passing glance. There was nothing he could do for them that wouldn't cause a million new problems. They had been avenged, it would have to be enough. He knelt by Akari's body, put his hand on her head, and brought her body out of the between. Then he turned and left her there. She would be spotted soon enough. Calling to report her would raise too many questions even anonymously. And so 8 hours after he had entered the subway tunnel, Izuku walked out of it with nothing more than new nightmares. The knowledge of what it was like to rest a gun barrel against his temple, and the realization that this was what the rest of his life was going to be like. Chapter 12. The First Sacrifice. Okay, so what happened? Detective Tsukauchi asked the pair of police officers before him. The first, a man whose quirk made him look like a light brown cat who for some reason wore a bell around his neck, named Sansa. The second, an average-looking man who was quirkless, named Jin. The three of them stood in a street that was swarming with police, all searching for and asking residents if they had seen a boy and giant naked man. Dispatch said that someone had reported a gunshot in that bar over there. Sansa explained, hooking a thumb over his shoulder to gesture to Kin's bar, down the street, and we were the closest to respond. We pull up and there's this dude standing naked over there. Jin continued, pointing over to a van parked next to the sidewalk. He's shaking all over and was about 10 feet tall. And he was getting bigger. Sansa interjected. By the time we got to him he was like 12 feet. Do you believe that was his quirk? Sukauchi asked, writing everything they were saying down in his notebook. Don't know what else it could have been. Jin shrugged before continuing. So we get out and approach him, asking if he's all right, where was his clothes, and if he heard the gunshot that had been reported. Then he turns around and, Sansa shuddered at the memory. He had these teeth and eyes, man. Anyway, he starts screaming nonsense at us. Says something about not needing a headache to know that I have a quirk. He twitched his whiskers, perhaps for emphasis towards his cat face. Then he said he couldn't feel anything from Jin and then he tried to fucking eat me. Jin scowled when Sansa trailed off. Said he could go for another dish, knocked Sansa on his ass, and grabbed me before I could get my pistol out. That's when the kid showed up. Sansa jumped back in. He appeared next to Jin with his revolver pressed against the villain's wrists. Fired a round through both of them with one shot and jumped onto the villain's arms to get him to drop Jin. Is that what the blood over there is from? Sukauchi asked, gesturing to the bloodstains on the sidewalk next to the van. Those ones, yeah. Jin confirmed. There's others on the curb next to the van and under it. Anyway, Sansa said to continue, the kid screamed for us to run and get out of here. Then the villain threw and caught the kid in midair by his right arm. It looked really bloody and fucked up. What did the boy look like again? Sukauchi asked. Did you get a good look at him? Oh yeah. Jin nodded. Kid was only like 2 feet from me. Curly green hair, green eyes, freckles, about 5 feet 5 inches. Looked like he was 14 or 15. A bit scrawny. The villain said that he was wondering where the kid had gone and that he had lost his scent, Sansa resumed. We both drew our sidearms and ordered him to lower the boy to the ground slowly. And then they both fucking disappeared into thin air. Jin announced with a shake of his head. Just like how the kid showed up. After that we looked around for them and then called everybody else in. All right. Thanks guys. Detective Sukauchi dismissed them before moving over to the van where forensics was taking samples and photographs. Anything unusual? Nah, one of the forensics guys said. Just some blood splatters and a couple of slugs. He said, holding up a plastic bag with 2 bloody bullets in it. A couple? Sukauchi raised an eyebrow as the bag was handed over to him. Sansa and Jin only reported seeing one. Is the other the shot that was reported? Handing the bullets back, he went on to Kin's bar and walked down into the empty establishment. He looked around the small place and made way for the forensics team to finish up their sweep of the crime scene. Anything weird? He asked for a second time, and the forensics officer smiled and held out 2 plastic bags. Toupee and fake mustache. Both have got some blood on them. The forensics officer's smile widened as Sukauchi looked over the evidence, perplexed. We also got a bullet that had been lodged in the floor behind the bar and some blood splatter with it. He handed over the bag with a single bloody bullet in it. Another bullet. Sukauchi wondered as he looked it over and confirmed that it was the same kind as the other 2 he had already seen. That was 3 shots then, one that was reported and another that Sansa and Jin had seen. So what had the middle shot been? Is any money missing? Sukauchi asked as he looked behind the bar at the blood. Nope, full register. A forensics officer answered as she dusted around for prints. There could have been a chance that this was a robbery gone bad. A kid desperate and armed goes to a bar, demands all the cash, shoots the bartender loses it and transforms with his quirk to chase the kid off, who uses his quirk to turn invisible, and gets into a fight with the police. Throw in a hero showing up and you have a pretty common occurrence. Seemed simple enough. But things were hardly ever simple. Where's the person who called in the first gunshot? Sukauchi asked as he backed away from the bar. I want to question them about anything else they could have heard. If they had heard the first shot, they probably heard the second and third as well. Oh, that won't be necessary, Mr. Sukauchi. A light feminine voice said behind him. He turned and was greeted with the sight of 2 nearly identical young women in matching black suits and ties. They both had shaved heads, wore large sunglasses that covered their eyes, and carried matching briefcases, and they walked in side by side. "We will be taking over this case," the one on the left said with a smile. "Effective immediately." The one on the right continued with a matching smile. "Excuse me?" Sukauchi asked with a raised eyebrow as the forensics team did their best to not look like they were eavesdropping. "Who are you and on what jurisdiction do you have to take over my case?" "We are agents with the government," Left waved away. "We've already cleared up the matter with your superiors," Right added. "You're government agents?" Sukauchi asked unbelievingly. "From what agency exactly? I'd like to see some identification," he requested confrontationally. Both Left and Right frowned at the same time. "Mr. Sukauchi, it is unwise to obstruct us in this manner," Left warned. "This will be mentioned to your superiors," Right mentioned. "I'm sure it will," Sukauchi said coolly as the forensics team now openly watched the exchange. "But I still need to see some identification." They stared silently at him for a moment before breaking out into big smiles and walking forwards to him. "It is very odd," Left started, "that you are sticking by proper procedure," Right continued. "When you've bent the rules many times to help a friend," Left continued, dropping down to a whisper so only he could hear. "But to be fair, he is a very mighty friend, isn't he?" Right whispered with a growing smile as Sukauchi's blood went cold. "How?" Sukauchi thought in a panic, doing an admirable job of keeping a straight face. "How do they know that I know that Toshinori is all might?" "But he is not mighty all the time, is he?" Left raised a hand to her sunglasses. "No, not as much as he once was." Right mirrored her action. They raised their sunglasses at the same time and revealed the floating orbs of light in their eye sockets that apparently was their shared quirk. The orbs spun slowly in place, giving off a faint yellow light that occasionally turned a sickly green. "And in the moments when he is not so mighty," Left's smile almost split across her face. "Anything could happen to him. Just like with you, and everyone else you know." Right mirrored her partner's near face-splitting smile. Sukauchi stood stunned at all this. Forget how they found out about him knowing Toshinori and being privy to his identity as All Might. Were these women really threatening to have him killed? The #1 hero? Just because he was asking for them to show some ID? Could they even do that? He knew that Toshinori had been nearly killed before in the past and was still injured to this day, but that had been a colossal battle against a man whose power seemed as unbelievable as All Might's. They seemed to just be some normal women with weird eyes and a creepy twin thing going on. "Oh, we wouldn't do it ourselves," Left exclaimed, and for a moment Sukauchi thought she had been reading his mind, which he could admit was a possibility. Who knew what those eyes could do? "But terrible accidents do happen. Terrible and strange." Right smirked, breaking the uniformity the two had at last. "Like spontaneous combustion," Left suggested with a smile. "Who knows why, and when that can happen?" Right said mysteriously, and Sukauchi was left wondering if they were threatening to have Toshinori literally burned to death and blaming it on a strange phenomenon. "I need to make a call to my superiors." Sukauchi chose a strategic defeat and pushed past the women, both of them lowering their sunglasses. He quickly left the bar and climbed the steps back out onto the sidewalk. He pulled out his phone and dialed a well-used number. It rang once before being picked up. "Hey Sukauchi," Toshinori said happily in his normal voice, meaning he wasn't currently working as All Might. "What's up, man?" "We have a problem," Sukauchi answered seriously as he marched back to his patrol car, a big one. The boss read the report as it was being written, having to wait as the person typing it in took pauses and made corrections to their horrible spelling and grammar. Once the physical description of the suspected vigilante, accused of killing 4 non-humans although only 3 remains were found, was entered in, the boss immediately recognized who it was. Green hair, green eyes, and a young age only meant one person. The slugger. The boss would have frowned if he could. It wasn't unusual for his agents to be spotted while dealing with the various strange and horrible things that the fucking traitors refused to. Especially on their first mission when they were the wettest behind the ears and still getting their bearings. So he wasn't upset with the slugger at all. He hadn't fucked up and wouldn't need to be disposed of. As soon as the report was submitted, the boss buried it as deeply as he could, hiding any automatically detected connection of it to the Izuku Midoriya file in the watch system. Izuku Midoriya had been warned about talking about what he had seen the day he had been kidnapped and fed to a deep tunneler, threatened with death if he talked. But he had worked a blind spot into the system to ignore that file, and a few others, when it came time to check up on all the people who had been told to be quiet about what they had seen. It was kind of easy to do that when you were in fact that system. With that done, the boss called the entertainer, synthesizing the preset voice he used when speaking to his agents. The phone rang once before it was picked up. "Hello, sir," came the quick and sharp greeting from the entertainer. "What do you need, sir?" "Good evening, entertainer," the boss said, his voice that of a warm and caring older man. He based it off of his grandfather's. "There's no need to be so stiff. How are you this evening?" "Thank you, sir. And I'm fine, sir," the entertainer answered, not easing up at all. "That's good," the boss said warmly. "Do you know why I'm calling you?" "No, sir," she answered immediately. "I'm looking at a report about a pair of interesting possible homicides." He explained, pretending that he had the report physically in front of him instead of stored in his memory. "And the description of one of the main actors matches our newest edition. The Slugger, if I'm not mistaken." "I'm sorry, sir," the entertainer almost shouted. "If he has compromised us, then I can deal with him as soon as possible. His residence is only 5 miles from my own. With one of my spells I can be there in a minute and a half. He'll be dead in 2. "Oh, no, no, the boss stopped. "He has done nothing to warrant that. There is no mention of any magic words, and the reports make no mention of the non-humans being discovered as such." He paused for a moment and made a sigh. "But I must say that I am disappointed in you, entertainer." "Sir?" she asked quietly. "Entertainer," he said seriously, "why is it that I am learning the results of operation by one of my agents through the fucking traitors?" She made some squeaking sound before he continued on. "Is it not your duty as my second in command to report the results of all operations to me once you have received them?" "Sir, she panicked, and he pressed on. "You mentioned that you'd have to go to his residence to deal with him. Has he been sent home already?" The boss pressed on. "Surely you wouldn't have let him go without giving a report? Or did he not call you once he was finished?" "No, sir," the entertainer answered. "The Slugger called for assistance during the last leg of his job. I had to go to the librarian to borrow his sword to deal with a creature that could not be killed conventionally. He gave his report right before I healed him of his wounds and brought him to rest at my apartment." "It takes hours of rest after being healed, does it not?" the boss asked. "Why did you not call in your report while he was resting?" The entertainer stalled, and he sighed once again. "Entertainer, you have worked faithfully as a member of our little resistance for 9.5 years. The boss began. And you have been my second for 3 of them. You are the senior-most agent under my command, with only the robber coming close at 8 years. He listed off her years of service. You have gone from the woman who called for aid in tears on your first 7 operations to 3 years ago single-handedly killing every single member of the Golden Snake Cult in just 1 weekend. 37 men and women and 8 non-humans in 2 days, with the fucking traitors never catching wind of it." "Thank you, sir," the entertainer said quietly in acceptance of his praise of the job that had gotten her the position as his second. Proper planning, equipment, and spell usage was key. "Now, I know that the things that we deal with are unnerving," he understated. "Many men and women have gone mad or killed themselves at the realization of how the universe actually is. It takes a special kind of person to face it, let alone fight it." "I know, sir," the entertainer agreed. "It's why we only take those who have proven themselves by killing the threat we were hunting before we got to it." Of course. He would have waved away her comment if he had hands, but with long service comes great baggage, he said diplomatically. "And I am open to all of you to treat your troubles in whatever way you see fit." There was a pause. "As long as it doesn't interfere with your duties." There was a long moment of silence. "Entertainer, were you unable to give me a report because you were high?" the boss asked bluntly. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, sir. She admitted immediately. The drugs help with the dreams and, when I need to use some of my spells. The traveling one in particular, there are things in the tunnel with me when I move through it, sir. You have seen a great many things over your years, the boss reminded. Not like these, sir. Not at all like these, she said quietly. Very well. The boss accepted. I will permit this mistake. This one time, he warned before she could thank him. But remember, Saya, he said, using her first name, as my second, the requirements of fucking up, all a lot lower than the other agents. Yes, sir. It won't happen again, sir, she said respectfully. Good, he returned to a more pleasant tone. Then I'll let you go. But do try to be more careful. You're so close to breaking the 10-year curse, it would be a shame if you stumble now. Life aware of the realities of the universe was a dangerous and frightful thing. It meant never being sure if what you were seeing or hearing was real, if the people around you were actually human, knowing that there really could be a monster under your bed, and knowing that every scientific discovery or theory was built on a false assumption. But choosing to actively engage with it was a different matter entirely. 60% of agents died within their first 4 years. 35% of agents were dead within 7, although the main cause of death changes to retirement. 5% of agents managed to make it to their 8th or 9th year. None in their little group, in all its history, had made it to 10 years. Well, except for the boss, but he was a special case. Thank you, sir. The entertainer said. I hope to be the first to make it that far. As do I. The boss encouraged. Goodbye, entertainer. And with that he hung up, closing his phone and voice synthesizer programs. Not wanting to draw any unnecessary attention, he returned the system to its automated functions, after double-checking to make sure that none of his agents that had been recorded by the fucking traitors would be getting any visits while he slept. And deep underneath the disguised local base of the fucking traitors, the monitoring equipment next to a brain floating in a jar, connected to various machines by wires and cables, showed a small, almost unnoticeable dip in activity. Sunday, June 6, 2128, 245 days until UA entrance exam. Izuku was unable to enter the between for 3 days after his first job. The words just couldn't come out, despite his best attempts. This wasn't so bad on the weekend when he was at home, and shut in his room all day, but at school it made getting away from Kachan much more difficult. The boy was still angry about the kick in the balls that Izuku had delivered him and still determined to murder him. The rage of Katsuki Bakugo was great indeed. He had nightmares for a week, dreams of being strapped down on a table as Cho-Chos circled it like sharks. They would come close, holding knives and flashing their fangs at him before darting away laughing cruelly. Eventually, though, a giant Cho-Cho-like kin would appear and he would wake up right before the monster was about to bite his head off. Other nights he just dreamed of the feeling his revolver's barrel against his temple and his finger on the trigger. That always managed to wake him in a cold sweat. He was happy that his revolver was currently floating around Saturn. He didn't know if he could handle having it in his room. He would have to deal with getting another gun soon though. But right now he had a much bigger problem. Tonight was a first-quarter moon, the last of the spring season. He had to make a sacrifice tonight. Otherwise the hounds unleashed upon him and everyone he cared about, because why the fuck not, by the old god that owned his soul. And so Izuku went to the nearest animal shelter and began looking at their dogs. He politely fed the workers a lie about getting a pet for one of his grandparents, and they happily showed him the dogs they had. Izuku did his best to hide his intent of finding a dog that was at least 25 pounds to meet his quarter-year weight requirement for his sacrifice. And he found one, a light brown bull terrier mix weighing 28 pounds named Terry by some very unimaginative former owner. So he politely thanked the staff for their time and promised to think hard about which dog would brighten his grandparents' home and lives. And that night he returned, traveling in the between wearing a hoodie with a backpack filled with some cheap candles, a leash, a lighter, and a kitchen knife he had all bought at stores across town. Terry had been rather happy to see him when he appeared in his pen and let Izuku slip the leash around his neck easily. But it turned out that getting a dog to move around in the between was difficult. First was the pain that taking him into the between had caused. Izuku had panicked when Terry had keeled over whining before he remembered what a pain his first trip to the between had been. What the hell that meant was a question for another day. After waiting a few minutes, Terry's pain went away, much like Izuku's had the first time he had entered the between. This brought him to his second problem of Terry having no clue how to pass through objects like Izuku or the lizards did, who were mercifully not around. So Izuku had to go in and out of the between every time he had to pass through interior door. The security tapes were going to look very weird with a man and dog suddenly appearing and disappearing every few seconds. Izuku probably could have planned around these problems if he spent any time thinking about what he was going to do tonight. But he hadn't. He really didn't want to think about what he was about to do. So after unlocking the front door of the animal shelter and walking out, Izuku led Terry down the quiet streets, a knot in his stomach quickly forming. There was a park not far from his home that would naturally be abandoned in the middle of the night. He should be able to do what he needed to do in the space provided in front of the sinks. Leading Terry through the night, who was ecstatic about being outside and on a walk, Izuku looked up at the moon that peeked behind some clouds. He didn't want to chance this not working if he did it in the between due to complications of it technically being a different dimension. So he would have to do this in the real world. He had feared that a homeless person might have been sleeping inside of the bathroom, but it was thankfully empty. Izuku had to tie Terry's leash around one of the sink pipes as the dog had nearly wandered away when he went about setting up the circle of candles. Then he had to deal with having to keep Terry quiet so as to not draw any attention to them. This made the task of making a circle with a set of candles and eyeballing the distance between them so that they were all equal more difficult than it already was. But soon he had all the candles set up, lit by his lighter, and after some coaxing, Terry sitting in the middle of them. He was trembling as he pulled out the kitchen knife from his backpack, already taken out of its plastic packaging. Okay, Izuku thought as he stepped into the circle of candles and looked down at Terry, who looked up at him panting. How do I do this? All Avatar had said, at what seemed a lifetime ago now, was that he had to slit a living creature's throat a quarter of his weight in a circle of lit candles. Do I approach from the front? He thought as he kneeled down and got close to Terry, the kitchen knife shaking in his right hand. When Terry leaned forward and licked Izuku on the cheek, Izuku had nearly stumbled backward into one of the candles. Don't be doing that, Izuku commanded as he looked at the happy dog. I can't look him in the face and do this. He realized and stood back up, moving to kneel behind Terry and putting his left arm securely around the dog. See, calm down, don't struggle, Izuku commanded as Terry tried to break out of his hold. His breathing picked up as he lowered the knife to point up towards Terry's exposed throat. This is it. Just a quick stab and then yank it across. That's it. That's it. His hand and the knife were shaking terribly at this point. Terry whined in his ear, perhaps sensing his new master's distress. I have to do this, Izuku said to himself. If I don't, then the hounds will come. He said, having no idea what the hounds even were. He doubted that they were actual dogs, though. Not just for me, but for my mom and dad too. His hand stilled and he took a deep breath. I'm sorry. And with that he plunged the knife forward into Terry's neck. The dog howled and began to thrash in place as blood began to flow out of the wound down the knife and Izuku's right hand. He held the dog firmly against his body, keeping his head back as Terry tried to rip his own throat out with his teeth. With some doing, Izuku managed to yank the knife across the dog's throat, spilling his blood onto the bathroom floor and all over the left arm of Izuku's hoodie and his left hand. And around them both the flames of the candles changed from a flickering yellow to a light purple. As more and more blood flowed out from Terry, whose struggles grew weaker and weaker, the flames grew a darker and darker shade of purple. By the time that Terry had stilled and was dead in Izuku's embrace, the flames were nearly black. Lowering Terry to the ground, Izuku stood and looked around at the candles, confused. What do I do now? He wondered in a panic. All I was told to do was slit his throat. There were no more instructions. He got his answer when the pool of blood from Terry spread out and managed to reach one of the candles. The blood erupted into green flames despite having never touched the actual flame of the candle. The fire traveled swiftly across the blood to Terry's body, and Izuku jumped back out of the circle for fear of being burned with it. The green flames consumed Terry's body quickly, his fur, skin, and muscles disappearing before Izuku's very eyes. The bones took a bit longer, but soon even they were ash, and all that was left was a small pile of ashes. And then the candles returned to normal, losing their near-black color almost immediately. Izuku stared at the circle of candles and the pile of ash, confused if he was done or not. He got his answer just a moment later. He felt the presence suddenly, as if it had come upon and consumed him before he could notice. It knocked the breath out of him, and he fell to his knees gasping for breath, his head throbbing in pain as his vision swam. He felt sick to his stomach, and if wasn't currently trying to get as much oxygen into his body as he could, he'd be sure that he was about to throw up. And then he heard the voice. Good, that single word from a soft little whisper that had left his ears ringing knocked him from his knees to the floor. And with that, the presence was gone, and all of the discomfort that Izuku felt went with it. He was safe. The debt had been paid, for the next 3 months. He gasped for breath and sprang to his feet, backing away into the wall before sliding back down to the ground again. He ran his hands through hair, both still bloody, and began to cry. The tears streamed down his face as he sobbed, his eyes shut as he refused to look at the candle circle or the pile of ashes that he had caused. Damn it, he thought as he tried to rub the tears away, only smearing blood onto his face. I just want to be a hero. End of arc. A new normal next arc. The Librarian, the Racer, and the Killer. To celebrate 2 completed arcs and reaching over 100 favorites on fanfiction.net, and over 10,000 views, and 100 kudos on Archive of Our Own, and over 1,000 hits, I'm going to do something that was a complete disaster the last time I did it. We're going to have a question and answers special chapter. Just leave your question with your review or comment. The last time I did something like this was for the Element of Freedom, and only one person bothered to ask any questions, but whatever. And to make it even harder on me, I'll allow questions to the characters which they will answer. Basically like an Ask blog, because why the fuck not? I'll be sure to give this plenty of time to collect questions before writing the special chapter. Maybe I'll release it on Christmas as a present. Chapter 13. Hunting Dogs. Monday, June 7, 2128, 244 days until UA entrance exam. Bakugo leaned back in his chair and glared out the window at the rainy weather, the class milling about between periods. It had been over a month since Deku had returned to school following his kidnapping and revealed to everyone that he had rediscovered his quirk. That had also been when Bakugo had unsuccessfully questioned Deku about this, accusing him of hiding his quirk just to make fun of them and, more importantly, him. All that questioning had got him was a lot of excuses, some random lady that Deku knew added to his kill list, and kicked to the balls. The blonde teenager growled at the memory, his hands clenched into fists in his pockets. He had sworn to kill Deku for what he did, but he had run into the problem of being unable to fucking catch the bastard. He couldn't do anything besides make threats on school grounds, and every attempt to catch Deku before or after school ended in the green-haired boy quickly turning invisible before he could get his hands on him. Bakugo had to admit that for a spineless little runt, Deku's quirk was oddly appropriate. It had taken quite a while for Bakugo to calm down and actually research if anything Deku said about suppressing his quirk was possible. As it turned out, it was very rare, but it did happen, the oldest someone reactivating there being around 27. So Bakugo admitted, to himself, that it was possible for Deku to have not been technically about not having a quirk. Still didn't fucking explain how Deku was so good with it. Reports of people reactivating suppressed quirks always talked about them having to go to special quirk therapy for a couple months at least. Not Deku apparently, he only needed a couple weeks. By himself. And don't even get Bakugo started on him having invisibility and intangibility. Hey man, what's up with Midoriya? One of his friends asks, breaking him out of his angry thoughts. Bakugo spared the briefest of glances to the green-haired boy who sat at his desk. Deku wasn't looking at his phone, writing in his stupid hero notebook, reading a book, or talking to anyone. He was just sitting at his desk, staring forward with dull eyes. His uniform wasn't buttoned and looked like he had just thrown it on. Did someone in his family die or something? His other friend asked, leaning against the window. Yeah, he looks like someone killed his dog or something, his first friend continued. Who gives a shit? Bakugo declared, gaining their attention as he did every time he spoke. He's probably realizing that his shitty quirk is only good for running away and not cut out for hero work. Maybe, his second friend accepted. Think he's like, having a flashback or something? His first friend whispered. That happens when you go through something fucked up, right? You start thinking you're back in it? He's not gonna go nuts on us, is he? The fuck could he do? Bakugo asked, keeping his voice the same volume as ever. Disappear and then pop up behind us yelling boo? Besides, anybody here could take on Deku one-on-one. Well, I mean, what even happened to him? His second friend quietly asked the first, ignoring the explosive Bakugo. The news just said he got grabbed and then found the next morning by some hero who heard a shotgun going off. Why don't you ask him if you're so curious? Bakugo suggested with a growl. What? I can't do that, his second friend answered, glancing at Deku, who continued to sit at his desk staring forward. What if it was something, like, really fucked up? He seemed pretty happy when he got back, his first friend reminded, pulling out his cell phone. You sure the news didn't mention anything? There must have been a statement from the police about what they suspected at least. He started to type something on the screen of his phone. No, there was nothing, Bakugo answered, frowning at being reminded of the oddity he had noticed over a month ago. They were silent for a moment as their friend started scrolling through his search results. After a while he started to type something else. Scroll around, type even more, and scroll more. Well, does it say anything now? Bakugo asked, trying to not sound interested. I can't find it, his first friend answered. What day was he grabbed? Like exactly 2 months ago, his second friend supplied. There was quiet for a moment as the first friend searched again. Yeah, I can't find anything, the first friend said, giving up. Give me the phone, moron, Bakugo commanded, and his first friend used his quirk to extend his fingers and hand the phone to him. He quickly went to the news site he visited and dived into the archives to the date the article he read had been written. It wasn't there. Confused, Bakugo checked the next day and the day after that, thinking that maybe he had gotten the date wrong. Nothing. The fuck? He whispered as he handed the phone back to his friend, the teacher for the next period walking in and everybody moving back to their desks. When he returned home that evening, Bakugo went only and began to hunt down for any information about Deku's kidnapping or the investigation into it. After an hour he had nothing. Then he began looking up how to look for deleted pages or articles, knowing that nothing on the internet was really gone. He still found nothing. What the fuck? Bakugo questioned quietly in his room. He had thought that the news of Deku's kidnapping and the reaction to it had been sparse before, but now that there was just nothing. The fuck is going on with you, Deku? Bakugo asked, his need to know about this mystery surrounding his once-upon-a-time friend reignited. Tuesday, June 8, 2128, 243 days until UA entrance exam. The call came during the last class period of the day, within the last 10 minutes actually. For a moment Izuku thought the ringing phone belonged to someone else until he realized that everyone had turned to look at him. He looked confused down at his backpack, sure that he had set his phone to silent like he always did. Then Izuku recognized the ringtone and his blood went cold. Mr. Midoriya, his teacher said to get his attention, I believe the rule is that phones have to be set to silent or turned off when class is in session, yes? Yes sir, Izuku answered as he flung his backpack open and pulled out the cheap phone. It just said work on the collar id. No, Izuku cried out in his head, his breath quickening as he started to sweat. The entertainer said she wouldn't call for another month or month and a half, it's only been like a couple weeks. I'm sorry I have to take this, it could be an emergency, Izuku said quickly as he bolted out of the classroom, ignoring the commands of his teacher to wait. Izuku raced down the empty hallways of his school until he came to corner of the building, the windows bathing the halls in a clear light. Checking the two halls to make sure no one was nearby or coming, he sighed and answered his work phone. Hello? Izuku asked, trying to get his trembling back under control. What the hell was he going to do? He didn't even have a gun anymore. He hadn't gotten around to figuring out a way to replace the revolver that got sucked out to Saturn. Finally, the entertainer said with a sigh. Listen, Slugger, I'm working right now, so I'll be quick here. The librarian needs some help on a job. You up for it? Izuku paused, turning to look out the window at the city glittering in the sunlight. School is almost over, so I can maybe help. Where are they and what's the problem? He asked, hoping it wasn't having to fight anything. He's at some fancy arts university near the center of town, and he just needs you to bring some candles so he can do a couple rituals. She explained. You ain't dead, so you must have done your sacrifice, right? Just bring him the ones you used in that. I threw those away, Izuku said quietly as he twitched at the mention of the sacrifice, suddenly remembering what it was like to have Terry struggle and bleed and die in his arms. He felt bile rising up from his stomach but forced it back down. You could have warned me, by the way. About what happens during, he added a little bitterly. Well then, just buy some more on the way there. The entertainer waved away. And what's wrong? Weren't expecting the green fire, or were you scared to hear the voice of the big bad god that owns your soul? She asked mockingly. Don't worry, you'll never get used to it. Just, what does he look like and what's the address? Izuku asked, defeated. He won't be hard to miss. He'll be the old white guy with a mullet and mustache. The entertainer described briefly before giving the address of the Fancy Arts University. If you have trouble finding him, try checking the between. And with that she hung up, leaving Izuku standing there looking out at the city. Sighing, he slipped the phone into his pocket and turned around to head back to class before the final bell rang. Bakugo was standing not 8 feet behind him, hands in his pockets and glaring at him. Kachan. Izuku gasped as he backed right up to the window, his breathing picking up and beginning to panic. What are you doing here? Teach wanted someone to go after you. I volunteered. Bakugo explained calmly, which set off alarm bells immediately. Why do you need 2 phones, Deku? What? Izuku asked as sweat started to pool on his forehead, his eyes darting around. This couldn't be happening, not this soon. That wasn't your regular phone. It looked like a cheap piece of crap. Why do you have it? Bakugo asked, taking a step towards Izuku. It's a backup phone. In case my mom needs to call me and my main one is on silent or turned off, he thought up quickly. So that was your mom then? Bakugo asked with a growl. Who's she got you going to help out? A friend. Izuku answered quickly. He's visiting and she's busy, so she needs me to go help him with something. How much did he hear? He thought in a panic. How'd he sneak up on me? Kachan could never be quiet for more than 4 seconds at a time. Really? What's his name? Bakugo asked, taking 2 steps forward this time. And what's he need help with? And what did you throw out that would have helped? And what should your mom have warned you about? He asked, his voice becoming harder with each question. Kachan, I don't see why you need to know all this, Izuku said quietly as he began to edge away from Bakugo, scooting along the window his back was pressed to. Why have all the news articles about your kidnapping disappeared, Deku? Bakugo asked suddenly, and Izuku froze in place, his eyes going wide in disbelief. They're all gone, Deku. Can't even find them using stupid internet magic. Why? He pressed on when Izuku just stood there confused. He began to advance on Izuku only for the final bell to ring, and with it Izuku saw his chance to escape. I'm sorry, Kachan, but I've got errands to run, Izuku quickly said before turning and saying the magic words to enter the between, his lips barely moving and the words masked by the bell. Before Bakugo could say anything, Izuku disappeared in front of him, and by the time he rushed back to class he found Izuku's backpack already gone and his desk cleared out. Toshinori killed the engine of his car and leaned back, taking a moment to rub his eyes and yawn. Today had been a long day and he had almost used up his full 3 hours as his superhero persona All Might. He couldn't even be happy that it was mostly used on hero work, instead he had spent it at UA High. observing and getting to know some of the promising students in a surprise visit. It had really been so he could meet some of the second-year students face to face, the first and third years being merely a cover. After all, the third years would be graduating by the time he started teaching next year, and Aizawa had seen fit to expel his entire class of freshmen, so it was necessary to focus on the second years and find which one of them would be a worthy successor. There was some talent, to be sure. There was a girl who could fly and shoot blasts of some kind of energy, but she was more than a little flighty, having spent more than a few minutes asking him questions like how he got his twin bangs to stand up so straight. And a boy who could transform his body to copy the abilities of anything he ate, which didn't sound impressive until he saw it in action. The variety of his diet giving him a host of creative options he seemed to know how to utilize when he wasn't, well, pressing his nose against a wall. But the one that had really caught his eye was the blonde boy who could become intangible. He was still struggling to master his quirk, the occasional running into the wall or total body intangibility when he was trying for partial was proof of that. But he had a energy about him. Toshinori had only spoken to him for a few minutes, but he could already see himself liking the boy. And he was more than physically fit enough to be able to withstand the power of one for all, and that kind of raw power mixed with the ability to become literally untouchable. Kid could easily become a monster that outshined him in no time. But that was for another day. Opening his eyes, Toshinori exited his car and locked it, making his way across the apartment parking lot quickly. Stopping at the door, he pressed the buzzer for the desired apartment and waited patiently. Yes? A familiar voice buzzed after a few moments of silence. Tsukauchi, it's me. Toshinori answered, wondering just what his friend was playing at. After getting called that his life had been threatened by a pair of apparent government agents, who could seemingly read minds, Tsukauchi had quickly decided to investigate on his own and said he would call him when he found something. That had been 2.5 weeks ago, and this morning Toshinori had woken up to a voicemail from his friend saying to meet him at his apartment that afternoon. There was a loud buzzing that signified the front door unlocking, and Toshinori opened the door and went inside. His gentle steps barely making a sound, he made his way over to the elevator and went up to the third floor. Once there, he quickly made his way to his friend's door and knocked. Tsukauchi opened the door and looked down the hallway before looking at his superpowered friend. Were you followed? The detective asked quietly, ushering the skeletal man inside. No. Toshinori answered, confused, not liking how this was starting. Tsukauchi, what is going on? This might be a little more complicated than I initially suspected. The quirkless man explained as he led his formerly quirkless guest to the living room. What do you mean? Oh, what the hell? Toshinori started to ask before he saw what was on living room wall. A small cork board had been fixed to wall. A couple pictures Toshi remembered being taken down and set aside in a corner, and stuck to it by a number of colorful thumbtacks were a few note cards. On each note card was some brief words or descriptions of a person or place, and connecting them to each other was a bright red string wrapped around the sticking thumbtack. Wow, Toshinori said as he walked up to the board, you got the crazy red conspiracy string and everything. It felt appropriate. Tsukauchi said as he went into the kitchen and got himself and his guest a bottle of water. Sit down and I'll explain what I've found. All right. The detective took a deep breath as Toshinori sat down on the couch and faced the board. Exactly 17 days ago I arrived at a crime scene at a Kin's bar, after a local patrol responded to a call about gunshots. He pointed to a note card that said Kin's bar. They found a naked man, now believed to be the owner, who has vanished, shaking all over and getting bigger. By the time they reached him he had grown to be about 12 feet tall. They then reported that he attacked them, but that they were saved by the sudden appearance of a green-haired and eyed teenage boy. Tsukauchi's finger trailed away from the Kin's bar note card along the red string to a green-haired, eyed boy card. He shot the man with what seemed to be a .32 revolver and then disappeared with him. With him? Toshinori interrupted with a raised eyebrow. Is that his quirk, you think? To make himself and others invisible? It wasn't that bad of a quirk. With a fighting style based around sneak attacks, he could be a real pain to fight. Or unbelievably deadly if he stuck to using firearms. Seems that way. Tsukauchi shrugged, stopping to take a drink. Since there was absolutely no sound from either them after they disappeared, it would seem he can also block sound from stuff he makes invisible. Anyway, he continued, after talking to the officers I go to investigate the bar. There are signs of a bloody struggle and some shell casings but nothing stolen. This is when the agents showed up. The freaky bald twins with stars for eyes? Toshinori asked for clarification and Tsukauchi nodded. He pointed to the note card that said creepy government agents that was connected to the Kin's bar card and a few others. They said they were taking over the case. I asked to see some ID. They made threats to me and veiled ones about you and your weakness. He continued on, gesturing to Toshinori's currently skeletal state. I backed off, called you, and then decided to investigate on my own. And after getting yelled at by my captain for interfering with government matters, I had to work slowly and carefully to not attract any attention. Tsukauchi explained. I started asking around, seeing if anybody had ever seen those pair of agents before or had heard of an agency that could just show up like that. Eventually I managed to worm some information out. About 20 minutes before the gunshot was reported at Kin's bar, a series of them were reported 4 blocks away at a Lady So's Burmese cuisine. Tsukauchi revealed, pointing to a note card that said Lady SOE's. Officers apparently arrived on scene to find fresh blood and nothing more. No bodies. The owner and her sons have vanished. No shell casings or slugs, and no cash stolen. Pretty soon though they got a visit by their own pair of agents. A pair of identical men. With the same star-like eyes hiding behind sunglasses. He revealed as he showed the red line connecting Lady So's and creepy government agents. Wait, Toshinori said, the exact same? Could they also read minds? The officer I talked to who overheard them speaking with the on-site detective certainly got that impression. Tsukauchi answered, taking another gulp of water. But that's impossible. It's one thing for identical twins to have the same quirk, but for a separate set of identical twins to also have the same quirk is just. Toshinori tried to figure out how this could be possible. Even if both set of twins have the same parents, it would be a 1 in a million chance. And that's not getting into the fact that they all work for the same agency. Tsukauchi reminded. So with that connection found, I decided to look for one between Kin's bar and Lady So's. It didn't take me long to find out that Kin and So were brother and sister. He indicated to the red line connecting Kin's bar and Lady So's. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded-up piece of paper and handed it to Toshinori. Unfolding it, Toshinori found it to be 2 pictures seemingly taken from social media accounts placed side by side. The one on the left showed a woman with light brown skin, no hair or eyebrows, large ears, a sharp nose, wide mouth, and red beady eyes that looked like cat eyes turned sideways. The one on the right showed much the same features except placed on a man, and he was giving a wide-toothed smile. He had way too many sharp teeth for Toshinori's comfort. They have very similar quirks, he commented, setting the paper aside. I don't suppose they happen to be twins? Identical quirks in fraternal twins were rare but did happen. Nope. Tsukauchi answered negatively. And a look at So's sons show that they have the exact same quirk as their mother and uncle. He then turned back to the board before his friend could ask the obvious question of how it was possible for so many seemingly identical quirks could appear at once. So then I began asking around the neighborhoods of the businesses, asking if anybody knew anyone who went there all the time, regulars, that sort of thing. Lady So's turned up nothing except a few loyal customers who liked whatever the special white pork meat they had. He explained before he put his finger back on Kin's bar and began to trail it along a red line. But the regulars at Kin's bar had mentioned that one of the other regulars Kin was friendly with disappeared recently. Tsukauchi's finger trailed the red string and landed on a note card that said Guro Murata. Local pimp. I talked to the guys overseeing the search and they say that he was last seen on the same day that the shootings at the Kins and So's. He trailed his finger along another red line away from the Guro card. Specifically, he was seen at a local underground casino, now shut down, by one of the other gamblers in the bathroom with. His finger landed on the green-haired, eyed boy card dramatically, who had his gun to Guro's back. The arrival of the gambler gave Guro time to attack the boy and then they both disappeared into thin air. the boy dropping his gun. But he did retrieve some minutes later, looking much worse for wear apparently. How much more of this is there, Tsukauchi? Toshinori asked, running his hand through his long hair. He could feel a headache coming on. I see 2 more cards we haven't even gotten to. We're almost done. The detective assured his friend. A search of Goro's record shows that one of his girls recently went missing and turned up dead in a subway tunnel, strangled. He pointed to the card that said Akari Higashi connected to the Goro Murata card. Want to guess the day she turned up? He smiled as he asked the question. Toshinori just groaned and rubbed his eyes. Recently I had a talk with her roommate, a Miss Mio Okada. She proved upset with the police having found Akari too late and pleased that we could not find Goro. Tsukauchi shifted his shoulders and sighed, growing tired with his presentation. Said that he probably got was coming to him and that it may have been a good little concerned citizen who took care of him. She refused to elaborate on that. I still see 1 more card up there. Toshinori pointed out when the detective went silent. And it's got a couple red strings I don't like. During my questioning about the agents, I heard about an incident that happened a couple months ago. Tsukauchi explained, pointing to the baseball field card. A little league game was interrupted by a tall villain, whose quirk gave his body a strange appearance and tentacles coming out of his arms, who according to witnesses was attacking. His finger trailed along a red string to the green-haired, eyed boy card. But, before the agents could arrive, Tsukauchi pointed to the creepy government agent's card and the red string connecting it to the baseball field card. A man appeared, very suddenly behind the police before they were ready to move in, and disappeared with what the police believed to be the wounded boy and half of the villain away. Disappeared? Toshinori breathed. You mean like? Just like the boy's quirk, yes. Tsukauchi answered the unspoken question as he walked away from the board. I'm tired. I've had to do this alongside all of my other cases without attracting attention. He sighed as he walked over to an armchair and fell into it. What is this, Tsukauchi? Toshinori asked calmly, staring at the board. This is the discovery of 3 different groups with seemingly identical quirks with their members. One which is apparently attacking the second while the third does its best to keep it all quiet and is not afraid to threaten to kill the strongest and most popular hero in Japan to do so. The detective answered as he took a drink. That one also being quite high up in the Japanese government. How do you think this is possible? The number 1 hero asked. Do you think that there is some villain out there copying quirks and giving them to others? The thought of a quirk that could in some shape or form take and give quirks naturally turned Toshinori's thoughts to all for one. It can't be possible, he cried out in his mind, fighting to remain in control as steam began to emerge from his body and he clenched his fists. Not now. It seems the most likely. Tsukauchi agreed with Toshinori's idea. But let's not jump to conclusions here. For whatever reason, at least 2 of these groups, if there even are groups, are at each other's throats. It wouldn't do to have your minions fighting each other, so it may be someone with just a similar quirk to all for one but who isn't as bright. You're wrong. Toshinori growled as the steam picked up. That is exactly how he would operate, Toshinori yelled as he fully transformed into All Might, his clothes suddenly fitting his large size. He would pit his minions against one another unknowingly, having them fight to prove which was stronger and fit to serve him. And the government agents? Tsukauchi asked. He was once the secret ruler of all Japan, Toshinori growled. Government spies are old hat to him. They're there to keep the fighting a secret as he builds and tests his forces. He stood up and turned to his friend. Thank you, Tsukauchi. You have greatly risked yourself and your career to find all this out. All Might did a slight bow to his friend who remained seated. You have once again proven the honor and skill of the Japanese police force, he declared, since his friend was unlikely to ever hear it from his superiors on this matter. I wouldn't go that far. Tsukauchi sighed. Getting all of this information was like pulling teeth. And I still don't know everything, like what Miss Okada meant by her concerned citizen comment or if the green-haired boy was the one behind the attack on Lady So's, since no one saw him there. Regardless, All Might boomed. My friend, I must ask a great favor of you. If you hear anything more about any of all that, He gestured sharply to the board. You tell me immediately. Of course. Tsukauchi smiled as he stood back up and shook All Might's hand, the man beginning to steam once more. As an officer of the law and a detective, it's my job to uncover criminal schemes, arrest lawbreakers, and assist heroes. Smiling as he reverted to his true form, Toshinori turned back to the board and frowned, his eyes narrowing on the green-haired-eyed boycard that was connected to so many others. He was going to have a talk with this apparent vigilante or villain boy when they found him. And see if this disappearing quirk was truly his own. Chapter 14. Spirits and Gates. Izuku arrived at the Fancy Arts University about 45 minutes after school let out, and he booked it away from Bakugo and his deeply probing questions. His grip tightening around his shopping bag with his newly purchased candles, Izuku had a minor panic attack as he went over Bakugo's questions in his head, waiting for the streetlight to tell him to cross. What the hell is going on with Kachan? Izuku thought as he shifted from side to side. He's spent the past month trying to kick my ass, and now all of a sudden he comes asking questions about my kidnapping and the news? Izuku could guess what happened to the news articles. It was likely that the fucking traitors, having believed him to be silenced on what happened and who quietly leaked the event with little fanfare, were now completing the cover-up by getting rid of all news about the event. As long as he never spoke of it and nobody who knew him decided to look up any articles about it instead of asking him, it was unlikely that anybody would go looking for info about that particular random kidnapping. He's getting too close to figuring out something is up, Izuku thought as he crossed the street. I got to figure out a way to throw him off or make him think that nothing is going on. Otherwise I'll have to. He crushed that thought before it could reach its logical conclusion. Walking on the campus, Izuku was struck with the problem of not knowing just where he was supposed to meet the librarian, who could very well be in the between, as the entertainer warned. So to avoid drawing the attention, a 14-year-old in school uniform carrying around a shopping bag on a university campus, he dropped into the between himself, deciding a search from there would save a lot of time if the librarian was waiting in the other space. Izuku entered the realm of green sky, alien worlds, no shadows, and hungry lizards to find a 6 feet 4 inches tall large old man standing in front of him, not a 2 feet away, smiling down at him. Gah! Izuku cried out as he jumped back from the tall old man, clutching a hand to his pounding heart. Ha ha ha! The old man laughed jovially as he watched Izuku's little scare. A bit jumpy for this work, ain't ya, kid? The old man, who looked like he was in his late 50s or early 60s judging by the wrinkles on his face, had long gray hair that was indeed styled into a mullet, a style that came back in the 2030s and again in the late 2090s. He was wearing a large white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, blue jeans, and black boots. His eyes were light green, he had a trimmed and neat graying mustache, and in his right hand he was holding a long suitcase Izuku had last seen over 2 weeks ago. He was also fucking ripped to hell and looked like he could break Izuku in half and then take those halves, stack them on top of each other, and break them in half again. You know, when the entertainer said that the new guy would be coming with my stuff and that he'd be a bit on the young side, I hadn't expected a fucking teenager. He spoke in slightly accented Japanese. How old are you, kid? 14? 15? I'll be 15 in just over a month, Izuku answered as he took calming breaths. Are you the librarian? He asked dumbly, as the man had already mentioned the entertainer and he fit the description she gave him over the phone. Yup. The old man answered as he stuck his left hand out to shake, which took Izuku a moment to move his shopping bag to his other hand to complete. But forget about our stupid code names. You can just call me Billy, he said with a big smile, revealing his real name. Isn't that against the rules? Izuku stammered as he tried to wrap his head around this encounter. This was all supposed to stay secret. What if one of them got caught like the guy who tried to kill him did? The fucking traitors would know all of their names. Rules? We ain't got rules, we got orders, the librarian argued. And those orders are kill weird shit, and anybody who's seen weird shit, keep all this shit secret, and don't get caught. Everything else is just secondary. He held out his free left and it took Izuku a moment to realize that he was asking for the bag of candles. So was this really all you needed? Izuku asked, a little confused about why he had to do this. Couldn't you have just gone to a nearby store and buy some? Yeah, but I wanted to be close by in case something was about to come through or get taken. Explained as he looked in the bag. What, didn't want to spring for scented candles? Had to get the cheap kind? He asked as he looked at the plain hunks of wax wrapped in plastic. What do you mean come through or get taken? Izuku asked, immediately zeroing in on the unusual part of the librarian's statement. The old man glanced up from the bag and stared at the boy for a moment before a big smile broke out on his face. You've only just joined up with us, didn't you? He asked rhetorically as he walked over to Izuku and threw his right arm over the boy's shoulders. The long suitcase holding the magic weapon thudded against Izuku's chest and knocked the wind out of him a little. Tell me, kid, how'd you like to see something fucking cool? He asked as he began to lead the confused boy towards one of the university buildings. So kid, the librarian asked, you ever wonder how all these monsters and aliens and shit actually get here? They were walking down a flight of stairs into the basement of one of the university buildings. To save time, the librarian just left the between and unlocked any doors that would stop them, since they didn't have time for the 7 minutes it would take Izuku to pass through them. Well, on my first job the ones I talked to said that they came from Burma. Izuku answered quietly, remembering the conversation he had had with the young Cho after he had killed his mother and brother, before shooting him in the back after he surrendered and tried to flee. In the moment it had all seemed so simple, the adrenaline in his system and his hatred for their crimes making the act of killing so easy. No, in retrospect he was shocked and a little scared that he had so easily taken 3 lives, even if they had taken so many more. He assumed the knowledge that they weren't actually human made it much easier. Those would be non-humans. Intelligent creatures that are native to Earth and looking to take the top spot from humanity. The librarian clarified. I'm talking aliens and stuff from other dimensions. Spaceships? Izuku thought for a moment, going for the obvious answer. They had to travel through space somehow, right? Nope. Well, mostly no, the librarian said. Robber says he found a landed UFO once and that he killed some aliens that came out of it until the rest ran back inside and fucked off to wherever they came from. The most common way for something to get to Earth is for it to be summoned magically by a sorcerer. This usually goes bad for the sorcerer because someone on the internet has a sense of humor and rarely pairs the ritual to summon a monster with the ritual to bind them to their will. He turned and looked back at Izuku with a smirk. You would not believe the amount of sorcerers who summon a monster only to have it immediately kill them, leaving it stuck here. Ask the entertainer about it. It's how she joined up, if I recall. Is that what you got called here for? Izuku asked as they arrived at a door at the bottom of the stairs. Someone messed up a summoning and now monsters are coming through? Not quite. The librarian said as he phased through the door and unlocked it, opening it and holding it open for a few seconds so Izuku could walk through. You can leave the between now. He commented for him anyway, empty air. He quickly closed the door as Izuku left the between, appearing behind the old man. I got called in when some of the students here started disappearing into thin air. The last one literally blinked out of existence while talking to her friends. What's causing it? A spell? Izuku asked as they walked into a large storage room. The center of the room was clear, but the walls were packed with boxes, propped-up tables, and foldable chairs. The room was lit with some fluorescent bulbs that flickered now and then and hummed loudly. Close. That thing is causing the disappearances, the librarian said as he pointed to the empty center of the room. There's nothing there, Izuku pointed out. Try walking forward a little bit. The older man said with a smile as he set the bag holding the candles down on a box and set his suitcase down. Trust me. Cautiously Izuku did as he was told, taking slow steps forward until he felt it. The feeling of magic rushed over him like a wave, his skin crawling and his spine straightening as he went rigid at the feeling. He jumped back and turned back to look at the librarian as he tore open the candle's packaging, the feeling of magic quickly leaving him. That is a gate. The old man answered the unspoken question, and it's the second most common way to get to and from Earth. And probably all around the rest of the universe too. A gate? Izuku asked, confused. reaching his hand out to the invisible thing until he felt the touch of magic sweep over him again. How does it work? It's a connection between 2 points in time and space. The librarian started as he began to pull out the candles from their packaging. One of those points is here and now, and the other is, well, probably another planet or even another space like the between at a different time. Or at the same time. Or maybe the same here but a different time, but that's just begging for a paradox. A what? Izuku asked, stunned at what he was hearing. Was he talking about time travel? You know, a time paradox. Evidently he was. See, gates don't go to a certain point in time, they go a certain, well, distance backwards or forwards. The librarian began to explain. So if you make a gate here and now and set the other end to the same spot 5 days in the past, then when you enter it 2 days later it would be 5 days in past from that point, or 3 days before you made the gate. The problem with that is that when your past self eventually goes to set up the gate the same way you did before, he'll find the other end of the gate already there. The librarian continued. So he can't set up the gate 5 days into his past. That would end up stopping him from setting the gate up, and can you see how this is a problem? So what happens if there's a paradox? Izuku asked, suddenly shying away from the strange empty space. Fuck if I know. Can't be good. The librarian shrugged. But I do have to close it up. Gates become unstable if they aren't used regularly for some reason. That's what happened to the disappearing students. The gate was pulling anything living it could find from either end and spitting it out the other. So they're stuck on another planet? Izuku cried out in alarm. Can we rescue them or something? He asked as he eyed the empty air in front of him. If they haven't been killed by the elements or walked off a cliff or something, then yeah, I suppose you could find them and bring them back over. The gate wouldn't have spit them out very far. The librarian answered as he crossed his arms over his chest. Although I would love to hear how you'd convince them that they weren't suddenly transported to another planet and the last few days were all a dream. Because otherwise that'd mean they'd know a bit too much, and we can't have that, can we? So we're just going to leave them there to die? Izuku demanded to know, becoming angry that people they could save, and realistically they were the only ones capable of doing so, were just being left to die. Yeah, pretty much. They ain't in our city, so they ain't our problem no more. The librarian answered disinterestedly as he grabbed the candles and moved some distance toward the gate. He kneeled down and started setting them up in a very small circle. Now if you excuse me, I need to talk to someone to find out how this gate opened. What? Izuku asked, confused, moving to stand next to the librarian as he pulled out a lighter and began lighting the candles. What do you mean? Didn't a spell open it? Oh, you're probably right. But it likely wasn't meant to open the gate, the old man said as he finished lighting the candles and standing back up, his knees popping. See, gates are very sensitive things. When they're closed it only takes a single spell on either end to make them snap back open again. Sometimes they do it at random too. Then why not just get rid of them? Izuku asked. Surely someone had to have a spell or learn something in the time this group had been around. Well, see, that's the problem. The librarian chuckled as he ran his fingers over his mustache. Robber and I know how to close them, but destroying is a different matter entirely. So we just have to keep closing them whenever something causes them to reopen? Izuku asked. Wait, he said as a thought suddenly came to him. How many of these things are there? If they couldn't get rid of them, then that means they were just piling up. In this city? 6 that we know of, which includes this one. The librarian answered as he stepped back from the ring of candles, pushing Izuku with him. You think I wandered all over campus until I just found it? Now hush up. I need to concentrate. Standing off to the side, far enough away to not feel any magic, Izuku watched as the librarian began to slowly walk around the small circle of candles, muttering magic words to himself. He circled it twice before turning around and circling it twice again from the opposite direction. With that done, he kneeled down and hovered his palm over every flame one by one, the fires turning from yellow to a bright purple very suddenly. When every flame had changed color, the librarian kneeled to hike up his right pant leg to reveal a knife strapped to his lower leg. Pulling the large knife out of its sheath, he sliced open his left palm and held his hand palm down over the ring of candles. His blood dripped down onto the floor and began to boil, producing a light blue smoke. Stepping away from the candle circle, the librarian made a fist with his bleeding hand and muttered some final magic words. The smoke coming from the drops of blood on the ground grew in size, now far too large to believable be coming from such small drops if such a thing wasn't generally believed to be impossible. As the librarian kneeled down to resheath his knife under his pant leg, the light blue smoke started to twist and turn as it floated into the air, swirling together into one human-sized cloud. Then before Izuku's very eyes the floating smoke began to take human shape. It started with the head, a protrusion emerging out of the top of the floating smoke cloud. This protrusion began to shrink until it began to stop in places, like watching a bag placed over a head constrict around it with the air being sucked out, slowly producing a bald and shaved male head. Next came the arms that broke away from the main body of the smoke cloud but stayed joined at what were to be the shoulders. Much like with the head, the smoky appendages shrunk until two defined arms connected to the cloud that was quickly shrinking into a skinny male human torso. Unlike with the other limbs, the legs didn't grow out of the cloud. Instead, the smoke just shrunk in the rest of the way until the waist, crotch, and upper thighs emerge. The knees, lower legs, and feet never formed. Instead, the smoke coming from the boiling blood just drifted up and fed into the floating smoky nude body before them. The entire ritual had only taken about 2 minutes and the body forming about 1. "Boy, you are skinny," the librarian commented as he looked at the smoky entity before him. "I mean, I know the starving artist thing can be true and all, but for the spirit of this university to actually look like one? What the hell is that thing?" Izuku asked as he cautiously made his way over to stand with the librarian. "This," the librarian said, pointing at the thing he had summoned, "is a spirit, specifically the spirit of this university." "How does a building have a spirit or a soul?" Izuku asked, confused. "Your spirit and your soul are two entirely different things." The librarian sighed as if he had had to explain this before. "Long story short, your spirit is a part of you but not you. Like how your arm is a part of you but is not you. Got it? Good. But how does a building have a spirit?" Izuku asked again, not really getting the answer to the question he asked. "Put enough people somewhere and over time their emotions and experiences will color a location. Give it character, so to speak." The librarian explained as the spirit looked from the old man to the teenager, its smoky eyes giving no indication at what it was thinking. If you've ever walked in someplace and just felt something, then that is the spirit of the place. It's the main difference between a haunted house and a building with ghosts in it. Ghosts are far more of a pain to deal with. The librarian complained, and Izuku didn't even feel surprised that ghosts were apparently real. "All right then. Let's get this over with." The ritual didn't do any favors to the gate's stability. The librarian said as he cleared his throat. "Spirit, do you know who I am?" he asked the smoky entity before them. "You are he who summoned me and gave me form." Izuku blinked as he heard a soft voice whisper directly into both of his ears. He swatted at his ears and looked around in a panic. His eyes landed on the smoky entity with its unmoving mouth and blank eyes. "Calm down. He's just speaking to your soul. If you've sacrificed, you felt the same thing when the old god who owns our souls says good job," the librarian said, turning to get Izuku to stop freaking out. "It's just being less forceful about it." "Now, spirit," the old man yelled, turning back to the summoned entity. "Do you know what that is?" he asked, pointing to the gate. "It is a connection between lands and times." "Fine. Good enough," the librarian said, happy with the answer he got. "It opened a few days ago." "What happened?" "Right here, in this room," he said quickly, deciding to be specific with his question. "Lovers secreted away here, the Lord with a terrible sin and the lady with a worried heart. The Lord revealed his sin to the lady, sure that she would find it in her to accept him as he was now as she did before. He opened the connection with his sin and the lady fled when she witnessed it and he chased after her. So a sorcerer showed off his new magic to his girlfriend and she freaked out," the librarian summarized, reading through the slightly artsy language easily. Don't suppose you happen to know if they're still on campus or what they look like, do you? I cannot feel them, and I can only describe how their spirits feel when they touch my own. The feel of when they laugh, cry, argue, and love each other. Great, now I got to hunt them down. The librarian sighed as he stretched and his joints popped. This is going to take all night, I can feel it. Are you going to kill them? Izuku asked suddenly, ripping his eyes away from the spirit to look at the librarian. A word of advice, child, you are watched and found amusing for now. If you cease to be or worse pique his interest, then it would be better for you to seek the punishment for your sin. What? Izuku cried out as he swung his head around to look at the spirit. The fuck did it just say to me? I said of course I was. The librarian said, apparently repeating his answer to Izuku's question. How the fuck else is this going to go down? Motherfucker is a sorcerer and showed off his magic. That's a death sentence for him and her. Not you. Izuku cried and pointed at the spirit. What the hell did you just say to me? I have given my warning. You are free to do with it as you wish. He will take direct action very soon. With a growl, the librarian kicked over one of the candles, and immediately the purple flames were extinguished and the blood stopped pouring light blue smoke. The spirit's human shape collapsed as the smoke was allowed to drift up and disperse into the air. All right. What did it say? The librarian asked seriously with a glare down at Izuku. Cause it stopped talking to me after it said the lovebirds weren't on campus. It said that I was being watched and that I was amusing. Izuku repeated nervously, and that it would be bad if I lost his amusement or piqued his interest. I think it told me to kill myself if that happened. He whispered fearfully as his mind raced at the sudden warning. Say, retire, when you mean suicide. Killing yourself could mean that you're committing suicide, killing a clone of yourself, or you're killing an alternate version of you from a different timeline. The librarian quickly clarified in a matter that left Izuku infinitely more confused than before. Clones? Timelines? Izuku asked dumbly. Yeah, killing a clone is called removing a spare, and if you're moving from one timeline to another, then killing the you in the new timeline to take their place is called switching timelines, and if it's the other way around it's called. The librarian's explanation was cut short as a wave of magic fell over both of them, making their skin crawl. They both went wide-eyed and swung their heads to look at the spot where the gate was. Although they could see nothing, there was no doubt about what was causing this sensation. Jesus Christ, it's activating! The librarian screamed in English, lost in his panic as he rushed to gather up his candles. What do we do? Izuku cried as he started to back away quickly. What if something comes through, or if someone else gets talk? Before Izuku could finish his question about what they would do if the gate claimed someone else, he disappeared before the librarian in the blink of an eye. And with him went the skin-crawling sensation of magic as the gate settled down again. Oh shit. Oh fuck. The librarian breathed as he dropped his candles and rushed over to his suitcase that he left back at the door to the storage room. Opening it, he pulled out a katana with bright red sheath and wrapping. With the weapon firmly in hand, he raced toward the gate and seemingly ran into thin air, letting the magical opening take him away. Izuku soared through a great white void. His eyes stung as he tried to search for anything among the void, only catching glimpses of his body and limbs as he thrashed around helplessly. He was sure that he was screaming, calling for help from anyone or anything that could help him, no matter how dangerous it was to do so, but he could not hear his own voice. But he could hear laughing. Ha 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 ha, it was all around him, a soft little whisper that was piercing into his skull and making him gasp for breath as his throat constricted. Tears welled up in his eyes as he tried to beg for whatever was happening to him to stop, his limbs and body beginning to stretch out before his vision into the void. But before his body could be torn apart, before his very eyes, the void came crashing down around him and all he saw was darkness. When Izuku next opened his eyes and gasped for breath, it would be on a world over 45,000 light-years away and 20 million years in the past. Chapter 15. What planet am I on? The first thing that Izuku noticed was that past the deep red canopy above him, the sky was a light purple, close to lilac. The sun that shone brightly above him was a lovely light blue, but the clouds were still soft and white as they were on Earth, so that was a small comfort. Pretty sky. Izuku thought as he took deep breaths, trying to regain some of his senses as his body ached and his head spun. He groaned as he tried to sit up on the solid ground, which seemed to be covered in a pink moss, and cool shadows he appeared on, his insides crying out in protest. At least I can breathe the air okay. Thank God for small, well, I guess big miracles. Okay, remain calm. Remain calm. I'm just on an alien planet. Izuku tried to think soothingly as he sat up and began to look around. He would deal with whatever the hell had happened in the white void when he got back home. If he got back home. This was probably going to happen at some point. Best get it out of the way early, right? Right? He thought nervously, not bothering to think about how he had only learned that something like this could happen only minutes before it had. Izuku found himself sitting in a small clearing in what appeared to be some kind of jungle. The plants seemed to have black bark, or whatever their equivalent was, and deep red foliage, like he had arrived in the middle of the leaves changing color in autumn. Izuku pushed himself up to his feet, his insides churning and briefly bringing the sensation of vomit up his throat as he stumbled a little. Once on his feet, Izuku's head snapped around in all directions, trying to see if anything was already getting ready to kill him. Okay. The librarian said that things that get pulled through gates don't get dumped very far from the other end. I just need to find the gate on this side. Finding nothing but dense black trees, red bushes, and what sounded like birds, if they were being strangled, Izuku took some cautious steps around the clearing. This was how Izuku discovered that whatever planet he was on had a bit lower gravity than Earth's. Izuku's first step resulted in him more or less leaping forward, sending him screaming face first back into the pink moss-covered ground. No, please no, Izuku thought dejectedly as he slowly pushed himself back onto his feet and tried to take another normal step forward. Once again he was sent careening forward, but this time he managed to catch himself with his other leg. With this he began to more or less look like he was running down a hill on flat ground, picking up speed as he went. The continuous running the only thing keeping him from crashing to the ground. However, Izuku was not in a wide open field but a small clearing, which meant that he soon ran out of open ground to run on. And with no way to turn himself quick enough, he ran straight into a tree. The impact and lower gravity knocking him back into the clearing by a good 6 feet. I've been on this planet for less than 8 minutes and I already hate it. Izuku muttered to himself as he watched some sort of butterfly creature the size of a pigeon with 6 golden wings shoot out of the top of the tree and fly away. With a sigh he pushed himself back onto his feet to try again. This time Izuku opted to try dragging his feet on the ground, running lines through the pink moss as he ever so slowly moved forward. This worked until Izuku once again made it to the edge of the clearing and encountered his next obstacle. How to get over a tree root growing out of the ground. Izuku carefully lifted his right foot and slowly, ever so slowly, stepped over the root and then did the same with his left foot. Happy with his success, Izuku was completely unprepared for when what looked like a giant centipede the size of a cat with tusks and a tall fin along its back rushed out of a red bush and across his right foot. His response was to be expected. Screaming in a completely manly and dignified way, Izuku kicked the creature away. This sent Izuku flying off of his feet and crashing down onto his back. His head striking the root he was so careful to step over, and the poor centipede creature was kicked straight up through the canopy of the jungle and sent crashing down nearly 100 yards away. Holding the back of his aching head, Izuku groaned as got back up once again. Okay. I can't go too fast because then I'll just end up running into things. But I can't go too slow because then I'll just be an easier target and it'll take forever to find the gate. Izuku thought as he looked around, trying to think of a solution. Maybe I can weigh myself down. If I add enough weight, then I could become heavy enough to move normally. He thought as he began, very slowly and carefully, scavenging around for rocks to fill his coat and pant pockets with. Taking a moment to see how far he could fling a stone with the low gravity, which turned out to be farther than he could see, Izuku carefully filled his pockets with the heaviest stones that could still fit in them. Soon he was standing back up with his pockets bursting with rocks, and he took a careful step forward. He did go farther than he hoped, but he did not leap forward like he did before. Well, it's a start, he thought as he did a little hop. reaching 4 feet into the air and nearly stumbling when he landed. Fighting the urge to empty his just-filled pockets to see how high he could really jump, Izuku turned back to the little clearing and tried walking around it. With a minute of practice, he was not so much walking as he was making smooth little hops to jump forward 4 feet at a time. Okay. I've wasted enough time doing this, Izuku thought as he looked around at the red and black jungle all around him. I have no idea which direction the gate could be, so if I walk in a spiral-like pattern from this clearing, just circling it in bigger circles, then I'll eventually find it. There was a loud screech above him and Izuku fell to his knees as he gazed up above the canopy as a large, hawk thing flew overhead. It was roughly the size of a delivery truck, with 4 black bat-like wings on its sides that glided through the air above the tree effortlessly. The fur it had was a dull tealish color and the talons at the end of the body were a deep purple. It had a large sharp yellow beak on the end that Izuku supposed was the head and no eyes that he could see, with bat ears that constantly swiveled around, trying to hear something. Maybe I should go somewhere where I'm less likely to be picked up by a giant alien monster, Izuku muttered to himself as the giant flying creature flew away, still screeching as it went. Hopefully the between on this planet hasn't got anything worse than Earth's. Kefkok xexxex hooked, Izuku said as he stood back up, speaking the familiar magic words that had become second nature to him. He was greeted with a familiar green sky past the canopy, a string of unfamiliar planets trailing off into the vast emptiness, and a disappearance of all shadows. So it made it really easy to see all of the monsters that were suddenly hanging from the trees around the clearing. They were each roughly the size of a man with pitch black fur covering their bodies. They seemed to be ape-like, with 4 powerful arms that ended in 4 stubby fingered hands and 2 strangely short but strong-looking legs with similar hand feet. Their heads were small, barely noticeable bumps with no ears that came out the top of their chests, with 3 solid yellow eyes in a triangle formation that did not blink. Finally, their toothless mouths were constantly open circles with a long tongue that swished around in front of them. Izuku really didn't like how at the end of the tongue was a second mouth that constantly opened and closed with a very sharp set of teeth like a monster he had seen in some old space horror movie once. Almost as one, the vast collection of these creatures stopped merely hanging around and turned to look at him with their bright unblinking yellow eyes. UFG cast WLOFGH, Izuku said after a brief moment of just stilled gazing with the creatures. Back in normal space, Izuku looked around the now thankfully empty clearing and sighed. Maybe I shouldn't go to the between here after all. I'd probably trip and impale myself on a twig or something. Boy, am I happy that nobody can see this, Izuku thought as he hopped off of a large rock and soared through the air to another about 6 feet away before jumping off of it to reach another. I bet I look like an anime character jumping around. I just need to blur into a bunch of lines and have a jumping sound effect. Izuku had been making good progress in his swirling search pattern from the clearing. He hadn't really encountered any creatures that seemed to pose much of a threat, and most were either uncaring of him or skittish and ran as soon as they saw or heard him coming. He had also attempted entering the between again once he felt he was far enough away from the clearing, but once again he had found himself surrounded by those black-furred ape things. One had been hunched over right next to him and Izuku had screamed the escape words as its mouth-tongue thing had shot at his face. I wish I knew what qualifies as nearby for the librarian, Izuku thought as he jumped off of a fallen black-barked log, it nearly cracking under the force of his landing. I'm about 200 feet from the clearing at this point, but I haven't felt anything. He hadn't felt the familiar skin-crawling sensation of magic that apparently signified the presence of a gate during his jumping, and he was beginning to wonder if only one of the pair of gates gave off that feeling. He assumed that the one back on Earth was the source, as he couldn't imagine some alien creating a pair of invisible time portals connecting a jungle to some university's basement. But there was no real reason to think that one of the gates would be detectable and the other wasn't. Could the librarian have closed it? Izuku thought as he managed to grab a low-hanging branch and use his momentum to swing forward and throw himself higher into the air. Doing this, he discovered that the black bark of the trees certainly didn't feel like wood and was actually very squishy. Would he just write me off for dead and close it up? I don't know how long he's been a part of our group, but he definitely has no problems with killing people. He remembered how Billy had answered affirmatively when asked if he was going to kill the couple that had opened the gate back on Earth. He said that you can reopen closed gates just by using magic near them, so I'm not trapped here. I may just have to do this over but keep entering the between every so often. He reasoned as he landed and jumped again, surprising himself at how quickly he got used to this. Well, this hasn't been nearly as bad as I feared it would be, Izuku thought as he noted a tree he had passed by a few minutes earlier on the opposite side soaring past. Another lap around the clearing more or less completed. Time to go a little farther out. I was worried after the giant Bathawk thing there'd be some giant monster I'd have to deal with. Which I can't since I still don't have a new gun. Although, what does a bullet do in such low grav? His thoughts were cut off as, at the height of a jump, there was a crash from some nearby light red bushes as a giant hand shot out and lunged forward to grab him. Izuku cried out in shock and terror as the giant five-fingered right hand, which was roughly as big as his entire body, colored pitch black, and looked disturbingly like a human's, wrapped itself around his lower half. He screamed as the hand clenched around his legs and waist and began to squeeze him tightly, threatening to shatter his bones as he beat at the large index finger with his fists. But before it could do anything substantial, the hand and Izuku were pulled back through the light red bush it had burst out of. Gah! Izuku cried out as he was slammed to the ground and dragged rapidly away, the giant hand continuing to squeeze his lower body. His face constantly pelted with branches and red leaves and the back of his uniform quickly becoming filthy with dirt and pink moss. Izuku could occasionally peek up and over the fingers that held him. The hand, like most, was attached to an equally giant wrist that was connected to a long and slithering body that reminded Izuku of a snake's as it pulled him along the ground. He couldn't see the other end as there was always more bushes or a tree blocking his view. Izuku hoped that this was some kind of absurd monster with a giant hand on one end, a snake-like body, and a normal head on the other end. Because the alternative was that this hand was attached to a very slithery and very long arm, most likely attached to something much bigger than him. Damn it! Damn it! Fuck! Izuku screamed in his mind as he was dragged over a boulder, his back aching in pain. I can't go to the between to escape this while it's holding onto me because I'll take it with me. And if I do, we'll just both end up being shredded by all indestructible foliage. Izuku really didn't want to go to the between only to have a red leaf that had been gently falling previously now punch through his skull instead of smacking his face. He wouldn't have to debate what to do for long though as the strange creature or arm quickly reached its destination. Bursting out of the jungle into a wide open area, Izuku found that he still could not see the end of the long slithering body or arm the giant hand was attached to because it was now leading down into massive pit. The long body or arm was now straight as an arrow as it rapidly pulled Izuku towards the edge into the pit. No. No 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 no. Fuck! He screamed as he turned and tried to grab the ground covered in pink moss, his fingers digging into it and leaving a trail of little lines as he tore up the covering. He continued to scream and curse as he was pulled over the edge and found himself falling with the giant hand down into a seemingly bottomless black pit. The light of the above world disappeared quickly as Izuku and the hand fell, Izuku looking up to see the hole of light get smaller and smaller as he fell. Kefkok xexexexhuJGT. Izuku cried out, desperate to be able to see anything even if it would now be far more dangerous to him in the between. The pitch-black darkness of the pit was replaced with light as Izuku and the giant hand monster were taken together to the between. Turning his head to look down, Izuku saw the bottom of the pit rapidly approaching and the long slithering body lying at the bottom like a pile of rope as it continued to retreat into a cave at the bottom of the pit. How fucking long is this thing's body? Izuku cried out in his mind as they neared the floor. They crashed onto the rocky uneven bottom of the pit with enough force for the giant hand to bounce off of the ground and come crashing down again. It was during this second crash that the giant hand loosened around Izuku and the teenage sorcerer was able to push himself out of its grip and fall to the ground. Before the monster could grab him again, Izuku scrambled away, making giant leaps across the great pit to reach a wall. UFGQASWLOFGH. he shouted as he pressed his back to the rocky wall. He was plunged into darkness as he returned to the real world, and his hearing sharpened as he tried to hear over his breathing for any sound from the giant hand that could have somehow followed him out of the between. But he heard nothing, no slithering from its giant body and no dragging or pawing around as the hand felt for him. After nearly a minute of silence, he gave a deep sigh of relief. "Yeah. Try to get out of the between on your own, asshole," he muttered to himself as he ran his hands over his face and sank to sit on the floor. He looked up at the small circle of light from the top of the pit about 200 feet above him. Damn it, how am I going to get back up there? Rummaging through his pockets, dropping many stones to the ground that echoed around the pit, Izuku found that both of his phones still worked and had not been crushed to pieces by the giant hand. So turning on the flashlight on his phone, Izuku began to look around the pit. About 50 feet in diameter, the pit had oddly smooth walls, making Izuku think that it was dug out instead of being anyway natural. But then again, he had no idea how things worked on this planet beyond that the gravity was quite a bit lower. Nothing for me to grab onto, Izuku thought desperately as he swung the light up and down the walls. There's no outcroppings or crevices for me to climb out with. He moved the light all around the pit and only found a couple cave entrances, and the only one big enough for him to walk, well, actually jump through, was the one that the giant hand had been coming out of. Guess it'll have to do, or I guess I can wait here to die, he thought as he began to edge towards the cave, dragging his feet as he had done earlier. With his phone almost on a full battery, Izuku didn't have to worry about his light dying anytime soon as he took his first cautious leap into the cave. The cave was wide enough that Izuku could hold his arms out and touch the sides with his fingers, and just tall enough, about 8 feet, that he didn't have to duck his head when jumping, although his hair did trail across the roof. He jumped down the center of the cave, hoping that in the between the giant hand monster was being torn apart or at least pushed around by his movement. Maybe I can climb out of the pit if I do it in the between, Izuku pondered as he continued to leap forward, the cave thankfully empty and quiet aside for his landings. I can phase my hands and feet into the wall and then pull them out and reinsert them one at a time to climb. It'll probably take forever and be exhausting, but it could work, he reasoned as the passage suddenly started to go up slowly. Up is good, he thought hopefully as he slowly ascended it, jumping and fighting to keep his balance on the uneven surface. If I try to climb in the between, I'll have to deal with the hand though. I suppose I can try to kill it with some rocks like I did with that big red leather guy and a bat, he planned, remembering the fight that had gotten him involved with this secret monster fighting business. And if I succeed, then I'll have to hope to God that nothing tries to kill me when I'm stuck in the wall during the climb. Continuing to jump up, Izuku was greeted with the walls turning from rough gray rock to smooth green stone. Carved green stone. Oh, shit, Izuku thought as he slowly panned the light around the change in the cave in front of him. He could see the gray dirt where the cave floor stopped and the smooth green tiles of the hallway began. This can't be happening, he thought as he took a cautious hop forward onto the deep green tiles, and he looked down the hallway, looking at the walls as he continued on. The walls were covered in what Izuku assumed were alien hieroglyphics. There was strange shapes whose meaning escaped him, but he did see one that looked like that giant centipede with tusks and body fin that he had kicked across the jungle. I think this is that giant bat hawk thing I saw, he thought as he ran his fingers over a rough carving of the giant four-winged creature. It was standing on some kind of altar. Is ant, wasp, beetle, bug things stood around it with their first set of forelimbs raised in reverence. They had 4 pairs, so the others were on the ground in supplication. Are these the builders? Izuku whispered as he backed away and continued on. So far he had only encountered aliens like animals, but if there were intelligent aliens on this planet, he really needed to leave before he met whatever was the alien equivalent of the little group he was a part of. He continued on for a few more minutes, mostly going straight with the occasional turn or intersection where it was easy to decide which way to go due to one of the ways often being caved in. He examined more of the hieroglyphics and found some that showed a great pit and some of these bug people being thrown down it to a great big round monster with a lot of teeth, and some coming out of a tunnel at the bottom to collect the bones and something that was spit out with them. I wonder what happened to them all. Izuku thought as he continued to leap down the silent hallways, thankfully coming to what was a set of ramps leading up. If the hieroglyphics were correct, then this was a part of a temple or something near the pit that hopefully had a clear exit to the surface. There was no giant ball of teeth at the bottom of the pit, and it certainly didn't have any long slithery hands, and I haven't seen any of these bug people around. This place looks abandoned. Leaving what he guessed was the lower tunnels, Izuku hopped up the ramps, not getting off on any floor and continuing up until he reached the very top of the ramp. Well, they weren't stairs, so he couldn't call it a stairwell. Coming out, panting a little and his legs aching, he found himself jumping into a grand chamber with great green pillar holding up a crumbling ceiling. The pillars were flanked by mostly broken statues, each a dozen feet high, of what Izuku assumed were bug people warriors, given that those that were partially whole clutched spears and clubs. Given that they had 4 pairs of limbs, they seemed to use the top 2 to hold their weapons, one holding a club in each hand or claw so it could hold a total of 4. Izuku looked up to the ceiling and saw the streams of light burst through the holes in the roof, able to see the lilac sky beyond. With this low light, he put his phone away and looked from one end of the chamber to another. On one end was a large ramp leading up 10 feet to a grand dark blue altar on a platform against the wall that he could tell from where he was standing was littered with bones and shells of some kind. And on the other end was a large door of red rusted metal about 10 feet tall that looked like it would take a dozen men, or who knows how many bug people, to open. More importantly, there was a thin ray of light peeking out the bottom of the door. Well, that's an exit if I've ever seen one, Izuku thought as he turned to look at the altar and then down at his feet. He had plenty of room in here and his pockets were empty of stones. I wonder if I can make it from here, he thought as he guessed himself to be about 20 feet away from the large ramp leading up to the altar. Leaning his body back, Izuku threw himself forward and leapt harder than he had ever done before. With the little hops that had replaced walking, he usually made it about 6 feet forward and about 3 up, but with this grand jump he soared about 22 feet forward and 12 up. Which meant that Izuku soared a couple feet over the altar and crashed into the wall, falling into a pile of bones next to the altar. Ah! Damn it! Izuku moaned as he rolled on the green stone platform, clutching his bruised body. That was a bad idea. Why did I do that? Pushing himself to his feet, he curiously looked around at the crumbling bones of alien animals and shells of giant insects. He didn't recognize any of the shells as seemingly like they were from the builders of this building, so it seemed that they weren't into sacrificing themselves or whatever they did on this altar. Turning away from the ancient remains, Izuku then looked over the dark blue altar and after closer inspection wiped away the dust that had collected on it over who knows how many years with his sleeves. Taking out his phone and turning on the light again, he looked over the carvings that he had uncovered. Izuku had suspected that this was the altar that they had worshipped the bat hawk thing on, given its size and presence of animal bones. But if that was the case, he found no evidence of it among the altar hieroglyphics. Instead, they depicted a great flock of winged creatures that the bug people were apparently riding with spears and bows as they hunted down a truly massive-sized flying creature that pulled images of a slick dragon to mind. It looked like it could eat a couple bug people and their flying mounts in a single bite. Assuming bug people were the same size as humans, that would make it roughly the size of an apartment block. Running his hand over the altar, Izuku leaned forward to see the opposite edge carvings instead of simply moving to that side. This was how he found out that the top of the altar was a lid when, with his greater strength due to the lower gravity, he pushed it forward slightly. Oh shit! He thought, jumping back. Izuku's breath hitched as he cautiously dragged his feet forward and using his phone peeked inside the opening with the light. I don't see anything moving around in there. His gaze flicked up to the great door at the other end of the chamber that was probably the way out. What are the chances I'm going to come back here again? He thought as he put his phone away and braced his hands on the sides of the lid. I mean, will they reopen a gate they just closed to investigate a random alien temple? Pushing the dark blue lid off, it fell to the green platform with a great echoing crash. Coughing, Izuku waved the rancid air away from his face as he gazed down at what he had uncovered. This wasn't an altar he had been looking at, it was a sarcophagus. Izuku looked down at the dried-out shell of the bug person, getting a good look one of the intelligent species of this planet. The first thing he noticed was that it was taller than him by a good 3 feet, putting it at 8 feet tall, which if that was the average it made that monster on the sarcophagus lid even larger than he thought. He could see that they were mostly ant-like with a black exoskeleton and great sharp mandibles around their mouths. If they had antennas they must have fallen off long ago because the head was clean save for some ratty rag that may have covered the head in death. The eyes had rotted away, leaving behind empty sockets that Izuku did not like looking at, so he moved his gaze down south. The body had mostly collapsed into itself, making it difficult to know what shape it had originally had, although he could see what looked like a stinger at the end of the large, round thing at the end of its body, so it did have some wasp in it. But there were two things that really caught Izuku's eye. The first was a spear, although with its length of 7 feet it was closer to a lance for Izuku, that was crafted in some kind of metal and strange wood. It was laying across the bug person's body like it had been laying on top of them or placed in their clutch in death. The wood was black like the bark of the trees outside, but with a cautious touch he found it was not squishy at all and seemed to have not aged as far as he could tell. The barbed metal point was a light, sky blue metal, shined brightly in the low light of the chamber that didn't seem to collect dust like everything else in the grave. The second he almost missed, as it was most hidden under the spear and resting on the bug person's chest. Wrapped on a chain of similar light, sky blue metal was a tube of silvery metal with small engraving made on it and a small hole at one end and a number along the sides. It took Izuku to realize that this could be some kind of whistle or flute. Well, what's grave robbing to my list of crimes? Izuku thought as he reached into the sarcophagus and heaved the spear and whistle out of the grave, careful to not touch the dead bug person's body too much. Looking over his treasures he began to wipe away the dust with his shirt sleeves, cleaning the wood of the spear and the silvery whistle. The spear tip and the chain for the whistle did not collect dust and were both warm to the touch, he found, due to being made from the sky blue metal. This will do until I find the gate, Izuku thought as he clutched the spear in one hand and planted the dull end onto the stone floor. He looked up at the point reaching a good 1.5 feet above his head. Gonna be a bit difficult to use though, I've never even held anything like this before, he thought as he put the whistle's chain around his neck, the sky blue metal warming the back of his neck as it gently rested there. Holding the whistle up with his other hand he looked it over, now clean of all the dust that had covered it for unknown years. I wonder what this sounds like, Izuku thought as he brought the open end to his lips and blew into it gently. Later he would kick himself over how monumentally stupid it was to do this and not at least check to see if the whistle was magic first. The sound that pierced Izuku's ears was sharp and unbelievably loud for how little air he blew into the whistle. He dropped it immediately, letting it fall and rest against his chest as he moved his hands to cover his ringing ears, the spear held close against his body. Ah! Damn it! Izuku cursed as he stuck a finger in his ear to try and stop the ringing. All right, won't be doing that again unless I'm wearing earplugs, he muttered as he hefted his new spear and dragged his feet around the sarcophagus. Now, to get out of here and find the gate, he continued to mutter as he prepared to leap across the chamber to the great red metal doors. But before he heard it, the sound of a great flapping of wings and the deep scream of some creature he had never heard before, the sound freezing his blood. A shadow dropped down through one of the holes in the ceiling and landed more or less in the center of the chamber. For a moment it was just a giant solid black shape until the great bat-like wings unfurled and revealed the monster they were attached to. It was the size of an elephant with a black leathery body and 4 limbs, the forelimbs being a pair of truly giant wings, and the hind limbs were powerful legs ended in claws with talons the length of Izuku's forearm. The back was covered in thin, long, dull gray spines that seemed to raise and lower with the monster's breathing. The neck of the beast was long and relatively thin and didn't look like it could support the monstrous head of the creature. The head of the beast was much like a crocodile's, scaled up a few times with a mouth full of even more fangs and a pair of antennas above the large red and orange eyes. Those hateful, hateful eyes. It was large enough that it looked like it could bite Izuku clean in half in one crunch if it got him around the midsection. For the briefest moment Izuku and the monster just stood there in the ancient chamber, gazes locked. Then Izuku sucked in a breath of panic as his senses came alive and his mind raced, moving to grab his spear with both hands. The monster in turn opened its mouth, showing off fangs the length of Izuku's hand, and let out a guttural roar as it began to walk forward. Its wings folded on its sides and each step making a dull thump. And a god merely enjoyed the show to come, pleased with himself. Well, I hope everyone liked the story, and please share or leave a like, or subscribe to see that you guys like the story, and I'll see you all on the next one.